Jake attacked another ex-human walker with his claws, shredding the mutant's throat. Dark blood poured from the ragged wound as the mutant tumbled forward. Jake leaped out of the falling creature's path and immediately lashed out at another walker. Over a dozen ex-humans surrounded him, but they were powerless against him. Among them were only walkers and leapers, and by that point, Jake was capable of dealing with these two types of mutants with little effort, if any. He felt like he could defeat them with his eyes closed. After discovering the edge of the city, he'd been battling mutants for a few hours straight. At some point, he realized that with his enhanced intelligence now at rank 2, he could concentrate on combat and simultaneously think about something altogether different. He utilized this newfound ability to reflect on his progression. While he engaged in combat in a vast room of an abandoned building, he was thinking about his abilities and skills. Currently, he possessed one ability, Claws, along with 3 skills, Enhanced Senses, Enhanced Agility, and Enhanced Intelligence. As he had noticed some time before, Claws progressed only when he used them in combat. When he simply wandered around with his hands transformed into claws, the ability didn't progress at all. He currently didn't have any other abilities, but he figured the same most likely went for other abilities, or at least for combat ones. The skills, on the other hand, seemed to progress all the time, albeit at a slower pace. This was due to his constant activity, whether traversing the city or battling mutants, all the while paying attention to his surroundings and pondering on various matters. From the corner of his eye, Jake spotted a leaper coil its body as it prepared to jump toward him. His expanded field of vision allowed him to watch the mutant even without having to turn his head. He jumped to the side just as the mutant leaped toward him. His talons lashed out at the leaper, tearing deeply into the side of the mutant. With a wail of pain, the creature collapsed to the ground. Before it could even get up from the floor, Jake stomped on its exposed throat, crushing it underneath his hardened foot. The creature was still alive, its hands clawing at him but doing little to no damage to him. While the leaper thrashed around beneath his foot, a walker lurched at him, but Jake swatted its outstretched hands aside before slashing at its throat. With the walker dealt with, he finished off the leaper by stomping on its throat a few times. There were still plenty of mutants to deal with, and after a quick look around, Jake lunged toward the nearest one. While he fought the remaining enemies, he thought about what he'd learned about mutants so far. There were 2 types of them, regular and elite. Most of the time, he had to deal with the former ones, because the latter were less common. Regular mutants were pretty weak and usually didn't have any special abilities. Elite mutants were stronger versions of regular ones and possessed at least one special ability. The other day, Jake had leveled up 3 times. However, each level up required more XP than the last to progress further. So it could be a good thing to start looking for more powerful enemies with higher XP rewards, because it was becoming harder and harder to level up. He had spent most of the night fighting mutants, but hadn't leveled up yet. He was only level 8, but he found that mutants of higher levels, such as shamblers or whippers, already presented no real challenge for him. He would love to ignore low-level mutants and focus his attention on more powerful foes, but he was unaware of where he could find more of them. Shamblers and whippers were pretty scarce. He usually only encountered a few of them in a day. Jake summed up in his mind what kind of mutants he'd encountered so far. A walker was a level 1 mutant and went for only 10 XP. A leaper was level 5 and worth 25 XP. Leapers were somewhat scarcer than walkers. Out of 10 ex-humans he came across, 9 of them were walkers and only 1 was a leaper. Both a shambler and a whipper were level 10, but the former one went for 50 XP while the latter one was worth 75 XP. Unfortunately, each of these 2 kinds of mutants was really hard to find. In order to level up faster, he needed to find a location where the majority of enemies were bigger and nastier, rewarding with more XP. The city was huge, but he'd already explored most of it and everywhere he was, he encountered only these 4 types of mutants. In the gameverse, a world governed by video game logic, this city appeared to serve as a starting location for new players. To find more powerful enemies, he most likely needed to progress to the next location, likely another city. But where was it and how could he get there? A few hours earlier, he'd reached the outskirts of the city. He'd seen what lay beyond its limits, a seemingly endless wasteland. Before venturing beyond the city's borders, he had to learn the location of the next city and obtain the means to get there, such as some kind of powerful off-road vehicle or perhaps some abilities that would enable him to easily move through the wasteland. By his estimation, he could currently get enough XP to level up once a day. However, he expected that after reaching level 20 or so, the rate of leveling up would drastically slow down. It would become really hard for him to level up in his current location, so by the time he leveled up to 20, he needed to have found the next location with more powerful enemies. Finally, Jake finished off the remaining mutants. For a moment, he just stood in the middle of the room, looking at the scattered dead mutants. Despite killing so many of them in the past several hours, he had yet to level up to 9. He really needed to find a more efficient method of leveling up. It was then that he remembered something. As a survivor, he'd once come across a section of the city where large cracks split the streets, revealing glimpses of the strange creatures lurking in the sewers below. He'd never learned what they were, because he'd never dared to descend into the city's depths. Perhaps it was time to venture into the sewers. Being amorphous, he was no longer afraid to do so. When Jake emerged onto the roof of the building, he was greeted by the rays of the morning sun. A new day had begun. He looked around, searching for the section of the city where the streets split by the huge cracks were. It didn't take him long to remember where he needed to go. Turning to face the right direction, Jake broke into a sprint. Reaching the edge of the roof, he jumped toward the next building. Jake navigated through the city by leaping from roof to roof. By that point, he'd become quite proficient at that. With just a single glance, he could assess which gaps between buildings he could easily jump over and which ones were still too tough for him. For now, he couldn't leap too far and occasionally needed to take detours along his path. He believed that by investing more points into body and perhaps acquiring some more agility or acrobatic-related skills and upgrades, he could improve his jumping abilities. Still, even at his current level, he could leap considerably farther than any human athlete, no matter how physically fit, would ever have been able to accomplish. He was well aware that each of his mana-infused jumps depleted some of the precious magical energy stored within him. When engaged in active physical activity, his body always consumed mana at an accelerated rate. To conserve the precious energy, he could descend to street level and traverse the city as before, moving at a brisk jog. Moving in that manner significantly reduced the amount of mana his body consumed. Yet, now that he'd found a new way of traversing the city, reverting to the old way felt like a step backward. Jogging through the streets was much less appealing to him than leaping from roof to roof. Jake knew that if he wanted to stick to his preferred way of traveling, he needed to gain more mana than he normally did. As he'd already noticed, relying solely on scavenging was not providing him with enough mana to sustain himself and accumulate enough to unlock new skills and abilities. Just like with XP, he needed to figure out how to gain more mana in a day than he typically did. Perhaps in the next location, mana consumables would be more easily obtainable. So yeah, discovering the next location could be the solution to both of these problems. Lost in thoughts, Jake continued to traverse the rooftops, moving at a constant sprint and leaping over the gaps between buildings. His expanded field of vision allowed him to quickly spot the buildings that stood at the right height. He tried to stick to the same movement direction, but occasionally, he came across buildings too tall to jump to or gaps too wide to leap across. It prompted him to make slight adjustments to the direction of his movement. Still, by his estimation, he was certain he would reach his destination pretty soon. Now that it was morning, he could detect increased activity in the streets below. More often than not, he noticed a vehicle maneuvering through streets overgrown with vegetation or groups of survivors engaging in battles with mutants. Despite having a bird's-eye view of everything below, he didn't pause even for a moment. He remained focused on his mission. Watching regular survivors do their thing would only prove to be a waste of time for him. As Jake leaped across a gap to reach another building, he seemed to notice something ahead. Hovering in the air above the center of the rooftop was what looked like a semi-transparent sphere that was distorting the light passing through it. Jake immediately recognized it as a magical anomaly. As a survivor, he'd come across enough of those to know how dangerous they were. But it was the very first time he'd encountered an anomaly on the roof of a high-rise building. The thought that anomalies could be situated on rooftops never even crossed his mind. He kept sprinting toward it. Running at a rapid pace, he found it impossible to halt abruptly. One of the 3 upgrades available for enhanced agility would have let him quickly change direction while sprinting at full speed. Only he hadn't obtained that upgrade yet. Propelled by the momentum of his body, he drew nearer to the anomaly, but he'd shed most of his speed. Moving now at a much slower pace, he was sure he could steer clear of the anomaly just fine. While he jogged around the anomaly, giving it a wide berth, he took the opportunity to examine it closely. Back when he was a survivor, he could gather valuable information about anomalies by scanning them with his PDA. Now as a mutant, he could acquire info on mutants with just a thought. He wondered if he could do the same with anomalies. After all, his enhanced intelligence skill seemed to have replaced the PDA he used to have as a survivor. He gave it a try, and it worked. The details about the anomaly immediately flooded into his mind. Name, Pulsar. Description, pulls everything within its reach toward itself, then forcefully expels it in random directions. Activates every few seconds. Effective range, 30 yards. Duration, 5 seconds. Cooldown, 10 seconds. Danger level, 15, medium. Upon reading the description of the anomaly, Jake quickly grasped the gravity of the situation he'd found himself in. Most anomalies were triggered by something. Some of them were activated if somebody or something got too close to them. Some of the others were triggered by loud sounds. But there were also anomalies that autonomously activated at regular intervals. Although rare, such anomalies existed, and he was unfortunate enough to have stumbled across one of them. He knew he had to get out of there ASAP. The level of this anomaly was almost twice his own. Its effective range was 30 meters, and the dimensions of the rooftop he was on were approximately the same. Which meant he had to get to the roof of another building to be at a safe distance from the anomaly. Jake sprinted toward the nearest edge of the roof. Up ahead, he could see another building that stood at the same height as the one he was on. The gap between the buildings was a little too wide for his liking, but he was pretty sure he could make that jump. Had to if he wanted to get out of his predicament unscathed. In his expanded field of vision, he spotted another building, which was much closer to his. However, to get there, he would need to turn to the right and run around the anomaly. He had no time for that as the magical anomaly suddenly began to pulsate. Before Jake could react, a powerful force yanked him back toward the anomaly. His legs lifted off the ground, and he was propelled toward the pulsar as its force pulled him in. He clawed at the air, unable to do anything to arrest his movement. A moment later, he was sucked into the semi-transparent sphere of the anomaly. For a few seconds, he just helplessly floated in there, feeling it pulsate around him. Then a force much more powerful than the one that had pulled him in propelled him outside. He barreled through the air, helplessly watching the roof of the building move away from him at great speed. Then gravity took hold, and Jake began to plummet toward the street 10 stories below. The fall was brief. In just a couple of seconds, Jake landed in the middle of the street with a solid thud. The tall grass and weeds protruding from the cracked asphalt of the road did little to cushion the impact. The back of his head smacked against the ground so hard the world briefly went dark before his eyes. For a moment, Jake just lay motionlessly on his back, staring up at the roof of the 10-story building he had fallen from. To his surprise, he felt almost uninjured. While his back had sustained some minor damage, his body was already tapping into his mana reserves to aid in the healing process. His head ached slightly, but it was bearable. If he'd been human, the fall would have resulted in a broken spine and death. However, as a Morphus, he not only survived but also avoided breaking any bones in his body. Hell, he wasn't even sure if he had any bones at all. Now that he was thinking about it, he realized he had no clue what his mutant body was even made of. Since becoming a Morphus, he had never felt his heart beating, leading him to believe he didn't have one. And now he was starting to think he might not even have any bones in his transformed body either. He remembered doing a hunt quest where he had to track down and slay an elite walker. He managed to kill the mutant, but not before it tore a huge chunk of flesh out of his obsidian black shoulder. After the fight, he examined the wound. He remembered seeing the cyan-colored magical energy freely flowing from the ragged hole. The wound was huge and deep, but when Jake peered into it, he noticed the absence of bones, muscles, sinews, tendons, or any other usual organic material that one would expect to see in damaged human flesh. At that moment, he hadn't dwelled on it, because his primary concern had been the fear of bleeding to death. All he could think about had been letting his body heal itself as soon as possible. Now that he remembered it, he realized his body didn't seem to have anything inside of it. It seemed to be solid and entirely composed of some hard material like obsidian, infused with mana from within. However, while his body was as solid as stone, at the same time it was very elastic and flexible, enabling him to move swiftly and perform impressive acrobatic feats. Jake found it strange because while the overall shape of his body was somewhat different from that of a human, he still moved like a regular person, with all his limbs bending at the correct angles. But as he'd noticed earlier, with every skill point assigned to his body attribute, the shape of his mutant body appeared to change slightly. He could only guess what his body would look like after he allocated more points to that attribute. All these thoughts raced through his mind in under a second. Before he could give the matter any more thought, he heard someone exclaim, "What the fuck? Did you see that, guys?" Jake instantly tensed, listening hard. "Something just dropped from the sky," the same male voice added. "I saw it," another male voice replied. "Yeah, me too," somebody else said in an accented voice. "I think it was a person, guys," another voice said, this one belonging to a young woman. "They fell from that roof." There was a brief pause in their conversation as if all of them took a moment to look at the roof the young woman had mentioned. "Well, sucks to be them," then, an older female voice said in a cold tone. "A person can't survive a fall like that." "I think they fell over there," the first woman said. "Let's check the body," one of the male voices suggested. "Hopefully, it has some cool loot." "Guys, this is wrong," the young woman said. "Oh, come on, Elena," the older and colder woman said. "Don't bring up this shit again. You gotta do whatever it takes to survive in a place like this. Besides, it's not the first time we've stumbled upon a dead body and looted it. You should have gotten used to it a long time ago." "It still doesn't make it right," the young woman said stubbornly, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice now. Jake heard them move to where he lay in the grass. The weeds bursting from the cracks in the asphalt were at least 2 feet tall, preventing him from seeing the strangers. But he could hear their careful footsteps, even though they tried to move as quietly as possible. They were sure he was dead, but they still tried not to make much noise, a habit developed after surviving in this dangerous world for a few days now. Jake sat up. As soon as he did so, a system notification emerged in his mind. "You have just gotten a negative effect, dazed. You are disoriented and feel vertigo." Oh fuck. Falling from the 10-story building and banging his head on the asphalt had inflicted more damage on him than he'd initially thought. While he lay on the ground, everything was fine. However, now that he was in a sitting position, the world swam before his eyes a little, making him feel disoriented and dizzy. It was a concerning development. In his expanded field of vision, he could see the group of survivors nearing his position through the grass. They were on his right, but his large mutant eyes allowed him to see them even without turning his head toward them. With a thought, he pulled up their stats while he studied them from the corner of his expanded field of vision. Marcus, level 9, armed with a pump-action shotgun. Maria, level 10, armed with dual pistols. Victor, level 11, armed with an assault rifle. Zach, level 10, armed with a similar weapon. A little behind them shuffled a scared-looking young woman. Her name was Elena. She was armed with what looked like a submachine gun. Her level was 8. All that info flooded into Jake's mind in less than a second. From the corner of his eye, he saw the group of survivors freeze when they saw him emerge from the grass. "What the fuck?" Marcus, who was leading the group, exclaimed. "It's not a person, it's a mutant." "It's alive," somebody else added. "How did it survive that fall?" The group remained frozen in place, their weapons trained on him. This was a dire situation. He was in no shape to fight. "Wait," he wanted to say to them but couldn't, having no organs for producing sounds. Very slowly, so as not to spook the survivors, he rose to his feet. As Jake turned to face them, most of them recoiled at the sight of him from the front. Jake didn't blame them. Even he'd been startled when he saw his reflection for the first time, even though he had a pretty good idea of what he looked like by then. For a moment, the survivors were silent, studying him. He could sense the fear emanating from them. It was understandable. He was well aware of how terrifying he looked. His large, intimidating eyes alone could instill dread in most people. Because of the dazed negative effect, Jake felt dizzy and couldn't think clearly. He knew he needed to find a way to calm the survivors down somehow, but no brilliant ideas came to mind. He could see their index fingers whitening as they tightened around the triggers. He knew the survivors were so tense at the moment they would open fire if he made even the slightest movement. "That mutant gives me the creeps," Marcus said, breaking the tense silence. "Let's just kill it," Victor put in. "No," Elena said. "It's not attacking us, guys. Let's just leave it alone." "But what if it pounces on us as soon as we turn our backs?" Maria countered. "No, I agree with Victor. We need to kill it. Being on edge, the group spoke rapidly, almost interrupting each other. Jake held up his hands and shook his head, but they were too stressed to notice his gesture. "That's right," Marcus said in a loud voice, silencing the others. "Smoke the freak, guys." Elena began to object timidly. "Guys, I think it's trying to say something to us." Unfortunately, the rest either didn't hear the young woman or simply chose to ignore her. Jake didn't even consider fleeing. He was a predator now, and the injuries he sustained only made him even more dangerous. His instincts for self-preservation kicked in, and he knew he was going to do whatever was necessary to ensure his survival. Without hesitation, he charged toward the terrified survivors just as they unleashed a barrage of gunfire upon him. Elena was scared. The black-skinned mutant unnerved her, to say the least. She'd never seen such a creature before. It wore no clothes, exposing its highly disturbing body. It mostly looked like a human, but was somewhat bigger with longer arms and a slightly hunched back. Its textured skin was obsidian black. Its face was devoid of ears, a mouth, and a nose. It did have eyes, though. They were the most upsetting feature of the mutant, irregularly shaped and unusually large, extending to the sides of its head. Devoid of irises and pupils, they were a solid cyan color. While they lacked any expression, they were ominous. A shiver ran down her spine as she gazed into the mutant's sinister eyes. Despite its unsettling appearance, the mutant somehow appeared sentient to her. Unlike the other mutants they encountered, it seemed reluctant to attack them right away. There was something about it that indicated to her it wasn't simply a bloodthirsty, mindless monster. Even though its eyes lacked any expression, she believed she could discern intelligence in them, and that made her uneasy. She'd long since come to think of ex-humans as mindless monsters, devoid of any human qualities. But the black creature before them seems different. Could it actually be sentient? Her teammates failed to come to the same conclusion, though. They didn't seem to notice that the creature before them might be intelligent. Just like her, they were frightened by its unsettling appearance. They were so confused and agitated by the menacing-looking mutant, they even forgot to scan it to assess its stats. On the other hand, it probably wasn't necessary, considering all the mutants they'd encountered so far were about the same levels as them. Yet she was getting bad vibes from the obsidian creature. Somehow, she could tell it was highly dangerous, and they had better leave it alone. She tried to tell her teammates that, but her pleadings fell on deaf ears, as always. At 22 years old, she was the youngest member of their team. That was probably the reason her friends never took her seriously. Well, they weren't exactly her friends. They hadn't even known each other before the collapse. Elena met them just a couple of days prior, having been surviving on her own before that. When they offered her to join them, she agreed. Unlike her, they appeared to have come to terms with doing what was necessary for survival pretty quickly. Looting the dead, their fellow survivors, for example, didn't sit well with Elena, even though she was aware of the need for it. But her teammates, however, never seemed to be bothered by it. She told them it was wrong, but they simply chose to ignore her. When they decided to kill the obsidian mutant, it seemed to grasp what they were planning to do. The mutant's reaction, tensing up and signaling a reluctance to fight, indicated a level of understanding. Raising its hands and shaking its head, it showed signs of intelligence. At that moment, Elena was 100% certain that the creature was sentient. She tried to tell her teammates that, but they ignored her just like they usually did. And when they opened fire on the obsidian creature, all hell broke loose. A moment before they began to fire, the mutant broke into a sprint toward them. Upon seeing it happen, Elena's heart skipped a beat. The black-colored creature moved so freaking fast. One moment it stood still, and the next it was darting toward them at astounding speed. The instant transition from standing to running was shocking. She'd never seen any other mutant move so fast. The ex-human threw itself to the side, hurling its body sideways out of the line of upcoming fire. Yet the barrage they unleashed upon it was so devastating it was impossible for the creature to avoid it completely. Some of the bullets her teammates fired hammered the obsidian mutant's body, tearing into its side. The ex-human staggered but kept its balance. It ran around them at impressive speed while her teammates struggled to track its movements with the barrels of their weapons. The assault rifles Victor and Zach were armed with shattered, but all the shots they fired, aside from the very initial ones, missed their target completely. Victor and Zach held the triggers down, pouring sprays of bullets toward the mutant, but their foe was too fast for them to hit it. Marcus' shotgun boomed and bucked in his big hands as he fired, but all his pellets went wide. Every time he pointed his weapon at the mutant and squeezed the trigger, the obsidian creature had already shifted to a different spot. Their enemy's swift and erratic movements made it really difficult for them to keep track of it. Zack and Victor ran out of bullets in their guns almost simultaneously. As soon as it happened, the mutant turned and dashed toward them. Elena saw its hand sprout long curved talons in under a second. It happened so fast, she couldn't believe her eyes. 1 second, the mutant's hands looked like those of a regular human, and the next they morphed into menacing claws. While they weren't overly long, they looked nasty. Marcus hastily fired his shotgun at the quickly approaching black-colored ex-human. Some of the pellets peppered the mutant's side, causing it to stagger. It quickly recovered, though, and continued to run toward them. Marcus pumped his shotgun and squeezed the trigger again, but the weapon emitted a dry click. Hastily, he began to reload it. All this time, Elena stood rooted to a spot, paralyzed with fear. She knew she had to do something to help her teammates fight the monster, but her body refused to obey her. All she could do was watch the terrifying creature run toward Victor and Zack, who were the closest to it. She could see greenish-blue light emanating from the bullet wounds inflicted by her teammates on the mutant. The color of that glow matched that of its eyes, and it also bore a striking resemblance to the magical energy found in mana consumables. Now that the obsidian monster was in close proximity, her teammates hesitated. They couldn't continue to fire at their enemy without running the risk of accidentally hitting one of their teammates. They panicked, not sure what they should do now. The ex-human seized the moment of their confusion to its full advantage. Zack screamed when the obsidian mutant reached it, swiping at his exposed throat with its claws. Dropping his weapon, he raised his hands to his throat, which had just been torn open. He dropped to his knees, choking on his own blood. Without even slowing down, the monster was already moving toward Victor, who looked scared out of his mind. Seeing that he didn't have the time to reload his assault rifle, he dropped it and reached for his heavy-caliber pistol holstered on his hip. Only he never got the chance to fire his sidearm at the mutant. The obsidian ex-human unleashed a flurry of swings at his stomach, ripping it open and causing his intestines to spill out of him onto the ground. The next closest enemies to the mutant were Marcus and Maria, and the monster chose Marcus to be its next target, likely because he was armed with a powerful shotgun. However, underestimating Maria was a mistake. Her pistol skill was the highest among her combat skills, making her a deadly gunslinger. She was extremely proficient in wielding her dual pistols. As her handguns cleared their holsters, the mutant charged toward Marcus. It rammed into him, sending them both crashing to the ground, with the ex-human landing on top of him. At that moment, Maria noticed Elena standing behind her doing absolutely nothing. She glared at her over her shoulder and snapped, "What are you standing there for? Do something." But Elena had had enough of that by that point. She glanced at the carnage the mutant had caused. Victor was already dead, the coils of his intestines strewn on the ground. Zack squirmed on the ground nearby, gripping his torn throat with both hands in a futile attempt to stanch the profuse bleeding. Elena could try to heal him with a stimpack, but to what end? Both of them would only become easy prey for the obsidian predator after it dealt with Marcus and Maria. Even though the two of them were currently alive, Elena knew it wasn't for long. So she had to try to save her own life while she still had a chance to do so. She spun around and broke into a run away from the battle. "Useless bitch," she heard Maria snarl behind her. Then Maria's pistols both cracked, and Elena flinched, thinking the cold woman was firing at her from behind. But the anticipated pain never came, and when she glanced over her shoulder, she saw Maria shooting at the back of the mutant instead, which sat atop the struggling form of Marcus. Once the bullets ripped into its back, the ex-human leaped to its feet and spun around. It closed the gap to Maria in an instant, slamming into the woman and sending her tumbling to the ground. Elena averted her gaze when the monster began tearing Maria's face to shreds with its claws. Sobbing uncontrollably, Elena ran as fast as her legs could carry her. The world blurred before her as tears flowed from her eyes, but she made no attempt to wipe them away, refusing to slow down even for a second. When she looked back another time, she saw Maria was already dead, and the mutant was straddling Marcus again, pushing the talons on its thumbs into his eyeballs. Terrified, Elena averted her eyes, focusing solely on running. All her teammates were dead in a matter of a minute. But she was alive. For now. She could still save her life, all she needed to do was run as fast as possible. When she thought she'd covered quite a lot of ground, she looked back one more time. The sight of the obsidian monster sprinting after her at an impossible speed terrified her to the core. Meeting its emotionless cyan eyes, she screamed in sheer horror, trying to pour on speed. Yet she couldn't run faster than she already did. Suddenly, her feet tangled in a cluster of grass pushing through the cracked asphalt, causing her to crash to the ground. When she looked back, she saw the terrifying black mutant closing in on her, which sent a wave of terror through her. Screaming in horror, she scrambled to her feet, fueled by adrenaline. Finding the strength to bolt forward, she broke into a run, while expecting the obsidian mutant to close the distance between them any second now. Please no, oh gosh, please no, oh no, she mumbled frantically as she ran on. Legs pumping, hands flying, she raced ahead at top speed. She was so scared, she didn't even dare glance back anymore. At some point, she realized the mutant should have caught up with her a long time ago, but for some reason, it hadn't happened yet. When she found the courage to do so, she glanced back and saw the obsidian predator was nowhere to be seen. At first, she thought the monster was about to pounce on her from above, but it didn't happen either. Not believing in her luck, she ran on, fueled by the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. A couple of minutes later, she stole another look back over her shoulder only to find nothing behind her. The mutant had mysteriously vanished. He'd never experienced such intense excitement in his entire life as he did at that moment. Fighting the group of survivors and slaying them one by one excited him much more than he'd ever thought it would. Even though the dazed negative effect was still affecting him, the survivors struggled to take him down. He felt somewhat dizzy and couldn't think as clearly as usual. Due to that, he moved slower than before, which allowed his opponents to land hits on him every now and then. Despite bullets ripping at his mutant body, he was unstoppable. While he could feel the shots inflicting some damage on him, it wasn't nearly enough to take him down. His body was definitely tougher than he'd believed before. Mana was seeping from some of his bullet wounds, but at a rather slow rate to be worrying about it. Even though the dazed effect slowed him down, he still moved too fast for the survivors to keep track of his movements. The fierce joy of the hunt and the lust of killing the humans were overpowering him. Hunting prey had long since become natural to him. However, until now, he'd only hunted down and slain mutants. Battling humans, as it turned out, was an entirely different matter. Humans were smarter, which made them way more dangerous opponents than mutants. As a result, battling them was way more interesting and exciting. Besides, ex-humans never displayed any emotions. They never showed a hint of fear even when facing imminent death. In contrast, humans valued their lives. They didn't want to die and showed a range of emotions in battle such as fear, anger, and confusion. This group of survivors hadn't expected him to be much different from the typical dumb ex-humans they usually encountered. The sudden realization that they were dealing with a much more formidable opponent instilled sheer dread into them. And Jake found himself enjoying it quite a bit. The taste of their terror intoxicated him. He slew them one by one until there was only one left, a young woman named Elena. However, she seemed to have reached her breaking point. She wheeled around and bolted away from him. Jake had always kept her in his field of vision, so he was aware that she hadn't even fired a single shot at him, paralyzed with horror. Not that it mattered to him. While she ran, he took a moment to finish off the wounded survivors without any concern that she might escape. Compared to him, humans were so freaking slow. He knew no matter how far she ran, catching up to her would be a simple task for him. He killed off the two remaining survivors, one named Maria and another named Marcus. After that, he gave his full attention to Elena, bursting into a sprint after her. The moment she realized he was chasing her, she burst into tears. His acute sense of hearing picked up the sounds of her sobs as she stubbornly tried to flee from him. She either naively believed she could outrun him or simply hoped so. But that wasn't going to happen. He was quickly catching up to her and was going to pounce on her from behind in a matter of seconds. Being amorphous, Jake never experienced the rush of adrenaline, which was exclusive to human physiology. He was no longer human, but as he just found out, there was a dark side within him that seemed to mimic the effects of adrenaline. His transformation into a mutant hadn't deprived him of his humanity. Jake had believed that despite his altered appearance, he was still human on the inside. But the transformation had had a deeper impact on him than he'd initially thought. After his transformation, a dark beast was born within his mind. It had been in deep slumber, which was why Jake hadn't even been aware of his newly acquired dark side. Until now. The joy of slaying the group of survivors and the sheer terror emanating from them awakened his inner beast. It was in control now and craved even more blood. And it was going to get what it wanted pretty soon. When one of Elena's feet snagged on a cluster of weeds, she pitched forward, landing face first on the ground. She looked back and saw he was almost on top of her. To her credit, she didn't give up. She quickly got to her feet and continued to run. Jake could catch up with her easily. But he froze instead. When the woman fell and glanced back at him, he seemed to have snapped out of it. He realized what he was doing. What he'd just done. He'd slain 4 survivors. By itself, it didn't mean much to him. When he was human, he'd killed his fellow survivors too. But it was always in self-defense. So the fact that he'd just killed 4 survivors in cold blood didn't mean much by itself. They attacked him, leaving him no choice but to defend himself. What troubled him was how much he enjoyed killing them, relishing his superiority over inferior, weak humans. But it wasn't his real feelings. It was the dark side newly unveiled within him. Even now, as he watched Elena run away, all he wanted to do was continue to chase her, to pounce on her, to tear her to shreds with his claws. Jake forced himself to stop thinking about it. In his mind, his inner beast screamed at him to resume chasing the escaping prey. But he didn't want to. He couldn't let his inner beast control his actions. He had to exercise a tremendous amount of willpower to silence it. It took him a few moments, but eventually, he managed to get a hold of himself. His inner beast seemed to get back to its slumber, and Jake no longer felt the lust for blood. He could finally think clearly and was in full control over his actions and thoughts once more. It was such a relief. When Elena glanced over her shoulder another time, Jake was already gone. He let her run away and returned to the massacre he'd caused. For a moment, he stared at the mutilated bodies of the survivors he'd slain. The lack of emotion he felt at that moment was what scared him even more than the fact he'd butchered them so brutally. At that moment, he realized that the transformation into a mutant had changed him much more than he'd initially thought. He'd changed not only physically but mentally as well, and it was scaring the hell out of him. He didn't want to turn into a bloodthirsty killing machine. He had to control himself. He had to keep his inner beast in check. Jake promised himself he would resist his dark side. He wouldn't let himself turn into a mindless mutant akin to the typical ex-humans. He was going to save whatever humanity was left in him no matter what. With that settled, he quickly searched through the dead survivors' things. They had various weapons, ammo, canned food, bottled water, and whatnot. None of these things were of any use to him. Each of them had a PDA, but all the devices were locked. As a survivor, he had at some point upgraded his PDA, unlocking a feature that let him hack into other people's handheld computers. However, now as a mutant, he couldn't do that anymore. Even his enhanced intelligence skill didn't help in that matter. Perhaps later, when he allotted more points to mind or acquired some additional mind-related skills, he would be able to hack into PDAs with the force of his mind, but at the moment he couldn't do that. None of the dead survivors had any mana consumables on them either, which made sense to Jake. Why carry such items in your backpack when with a simple mental command, one could absorb the energy stored within a mana consumable? Survivors probably absorbed the magical energy from mana consumables as soon as they found them, much like Jake himself had done during his time as a survivor. The realization that he hadn't received any experience points for killing the 4 survivors further solidified his decision to refrain from hunting down and killing humans from now on. They had nothing to offer him anyway, no XP, no mana, no nothing. To avoid getting into a fight with humans and risking waking his inner beast, Jake decided to avoid dealing with survivors as much as possible. After that, he looked around to orient himself. Before the pulsar magical anomaly pushed him off the roof, he was on his way to the part of the city that was split with huge crevices. He scanned his surroundings and realized he wasn't far off from his intended destination. So there was no need to scale the high-rise rooftops. Turning to face the correct direction, Jake transitioned into a brisk run toward his goal. It took him just a few minutes of brisk jogging to reach his destination. He slowed down when he made it to the section of the city where huge crevices crisscrossed the streets. Some of them could be crossed without much trouble by simply stepping over, while some of the others were so wide he had to leap over. When he was a survivor, he had a hard time navigating this area. One time, he even nearly fell into one of the crevices. As a mutant now, he didn't have any problems traversing this part of the city. His inhuman agility and remarkable acrobatic abilities allowed him to easily navigate through the area, leaping over the gaping cracks with ease. Jake came to a halt at the edge of a particularly wide crevice, peering down into the dimly lit depths below. The huge crack revealed the intricate maze-like network of the sewers. Previously, as a survivor, he discovered two kinds of creatures lurking in those tunnels. The first were large rat-like beings with elongated snouts and red eyes, often moving in groups. The second one was a massive terrifying creature resembling a hybrid of a bear and an alligator. This creature seemed to be a loner, navigating the sewers on its own. The rat things would scatter in fear at the mere sight of the daunting bear alligator. That was basically all that Jake had learned about the sewers and its inhabitants when he was a human survivor. He remembered being terrified when he nearly fell into one of the crevices. The thought of finding himself in the dark depths of the sewers where rat things and bear alligators lurked in the darkness filled him with dread. Now that he was a mutant, he wasn't afraid anymore. He was planning to descend into the maze-like network of underground tunnels to see what they had to offer. He stepped a little closer to the edge of the crevice to gauge the depth of the drop. Leaning over, he peered into the darkness. It wasn't too deep, so Jake was sure he would be perfectly fine if he jumped in there. Especially considering he'd hardly received any damage when he fell off the roof of a 10-story building. The drop to the sewers down below wasn't nearly as high as that. Now that Jake remembered about falling off the roof and the subsequent clash with a group of survivors, he paused. The dazed negative effect had long since faded out, but some of the bullet wounds still hadn't healed up completely. If he'd rested for some time after the fight, his body would solely have focused on healing itself and mended his wounds by now. But Jake hadn't given it such an opportunity. After the battle, he searched through the dead survivor stuff for a minute before breaking into a run to this part of the city, giving his body no time to rest. So while some of the bullet wounds had already closed, some of the worst ones were still healing. Jake decided to wait until his body completely recovered. He lowered himself into a sitting position and looked at one of the wounds on his side. He could see a bluish energy seeping out of the hole. Deep inside the wound, embedded in his obsidian flesh and enveloped by the bluish glow of mana, was a bullet. Jake watched it slowly disintegrate into nothingness, being seemingly dissolved by mana contained within his body. After that, the wound sealed shut entirely, halting the leakage of mana and leaving no trace of a scar on his body. A few more minutes later, the rest of his wounds healed up as well. Jake was now fully recovered and good to go. He got to his feet and with a thought, pulled up his mana count. The exertion from leaping across rooftops, engaging in combat with survivors, and mana loss from the wounds he sustained greatly depleted his energy reserves. Despite this, he still had a sufficient amount remaining, so he wasn't at risk of running out of mana in the next several hours. However, he was going to need to replenish this magical energy sooner rather than later. Hopefully, he would come across some mana consumables in the sewers down below. With that in mind, he stepped to the very edge of the gaping crevice. He glanced into the semi-darkness below one more time before jumping down. The descent was brief, lasting less than a second. He landed in the middle of a dark tunnel, splashing dirty water everywhere, bending his knees to absorb the impact. Straightening up, he surveyed his surroundings. Sunlight filtering in through the crevice above provided enough illumination to see by. The distant areas of the tunnel where the crack ended were engulfed in total darkness. Jake was unfazed by it. Enhanced senses allowed him to see in the darkness pretty well. Shallow, murky water trickled along the tunnel floor. It was so dirty it was almost black. The stench of the sewers was overpowering, but it didn't faze him in the slightest. Had he remained human, he would have struggled to bear the stench, risking throwing up the contents of his stomach. As a mutant, the foul scent didn't affect him at all. His anatomy had changed drastically after his transformation into a Morphus. Unlike most of the living organisms, he no longer even had a stomach, or any other internal organs for that matter. As far as he knew, he was simply a piece of some obsidian-like elastic material, molded to resemble a human form and animated by the magical energy contained inside his body. As long as enough mana circulated within his strange body, he would remain alive. However, if his mana reserves were ever depleted, he would turn into a lifeless piece of obsidian-like material. This was a fate he was determined to avoid at all costs. He cast a quick glance back over his shoulder and saw that the front and back ends of the tunnel appeared identical, both shrouded in darkness. Aside from the gurgling sounds coming from the putrid water below him, the sewers remained eerie quiet. Yet Jake knew that somewhere deeper within the labyrinth of underground tunnels lurked its upsetting dwellers. Picking a random direction, he set off to explore the sewers. For a few minutes, Jake traversed the underground tunnels of the city's sewers. It was dark and damp, with putrid, dirty water trickling along the tunnel floors. Here and there, murky water ran in rivulets down the walls as well. A foul scent permeated the air wherever he went. In some areas, sunlight filtered in through the cracks above. The deeper sections of the sewers were shrouded in total darkness, though. Fortunately, it posed little trouble for Jake. His enhanced sight allowed him to see pretty well in the dark. Unperturbed by the lack of light, the foul scent, and the damp, dirty conditions of the sewers, he continued to navigate the underground tunnels. The scariest part about the sewers was the mutants that inhabited the city's underground tunnels. But Jake wasn't afraid. In fact, he was eager to encounter new types of enemies. Aside from the gurgle emanating from the running water and the splashes from his footsteps, silence enveloped the tunnels. While he knew there had to be unknown creatures lurking somewhere in the darkness of the sewers, he had yet to find them. They must have been somewhere in the deeper parts of the sewers. He reached a four-way juncture. The front, left-hand, and right-hand tunnels all looked identical to him, and Jake paused for a moment, listening carefully to decide which way to take. He thought he heard faint, distant sounds like water sloshing from the right-hand tunnel, so he turned that way and continued on. For a few more minutes, he plodded through the tunnel that looked almost identical to the others he'd passed through. The absence of cracks in the ceiling cast this section of the sewers into total darkness. The water level appeared slightly elevated here, with streams of grimy water splashing over his feet. Undeterred by the dampness and lack of light, Jake pressed on. At last, he spotted a gathering of several creatures in the distance. Taking care to move stealthily, he slowed his pace to minimize the noise he made. The critters had neither noticed nor heard him yet. Drawing closer, he began to discern more details about them. Jake focused his attention on one of the disgusting critters and called up its stats. Mutated rat, level 10. Special ability, none. He'd first encountered those rat things and watched them from up above when he was a survivor. Now, up close, he could discern more details about them. They resembled kangaroos in form and size, but their snouts and tails were akin to those of precolapse rats. Their dark, greasy fur was patchy, showing bald spots in multiple areas and revealing large sores on their skin, some of which were oozing yellowish pus. The stench emanating from their bodies even surpassed that of the sewers themselves. Despite Jake's calm and collected mindset as a Morphus, he found himself repulsed by those vile creatures. But he continued to move toward them nevertheless. The critters down the tunnel were preoccupied with picking at the rotting dead body of another creature, which looked just like them. The group of the repugnant critters hadn't spotted him yet. Drawing closer, he studied them and came to the conclusion dealing with them shouldn't be too difficult. He continued to move down the tunnel toward the group of mutated rats. Despite his attempts to move quietly, the splashing sounds of the water he sloshed through gave him away sooner than he'd hoped. Two of the rat-like creatures withdrew their gore-smeared snouts from deep within the rotting meat of the dead body to glance back at him. Their red, malevolent eyes squinted as the vile creature hissed at him. Alerted by the noise, the rest of the critters swiftly turned their heads to glare at him as well. The mutants had discovered him way sooner than he'd anticipated. While he'd hoped for the ideal scenario of sneaking up on them and taking out at least one rat before being detected by the others, he remained unfazed by the turn of events. All the mutated rats had turned to face him by that point. However, they seemed reluctant to attack him as if unsure of what to make of him. Having never encountered anything like him before, they appeared wary and unsure of how dangerous he might be. Before they could decide whether to flee or fight, he charged at them. Some of them flinched in fear, and for a moment it seemed like they were going to scatter in panic. It didn't happen, though. Instead, they darted toward him, bounding on two legs like kangaroos. Jake was glad they did. He wouldn't have wanted to chase them through the dark tunnels of the sewers. With a mental command, he morphed his hands into claws and lashed out at the first mutant to reach him. His talons pierced its forehead, cutting through the skin and scraping against its skull, doing little to no damage to the creature. He dodged to the left as the monster lunged toward him, attempting to take a bite. The wide tunnel provided ample space for Jake to maneuver, allowing him to evade the creature's teeth with ease. The mutated rat lunged toward him once more, but Jake avoided its attack and raked the side of its neck with his claws. He must have pierced a major blood vessel, because a red fountain poured from the wound. The creature wailed as it lurched away from him, defeated and with no fight left in it. The critter bounded a little farther down the tunnel before it succumbed to the wound, collapsing to the floor and splashing stinky water everywhere. Jake was already dealing with another mutated rat, slicing the side of its body open with a flurry of swings. These creatures were pretty fast, but no match for his own agility and speed. The second rat thing dropped to the wet floor, where it convulsed for a few seconds, before it died. It didn't take Jake long to deal with the remaining critters. When only one was left, it tried to bound away, but Jake didn't let it. Ramming into the overgrown rat, he tackled it to the ground, unleashing a brutal attack and ripping its side open. He then stood up, surveying the area. All the monsters were dead, and the blood that spilled from them mixed with the murky water. A system notification emerged in his mind. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 150 XP. He'd slain 5 critters, which meant a mutated rat was worth 30 XP. Not too much, but still better than the 25 XP reward for ex-human leapers. Besides, leapers were pretty rare. Out of every 10 ex-humans he encountered, 9 were walkers and only 1 was a leaper. If those rat things were abundant in the sewers, he could linger there for some time to gain experience points. For the next half an hour or so, he traversed the sewers, every now and then encountering groups of mutated rats and fighting them. He continued to explore the underground tunnels for a while, but had yet to come across a single mana consumable, which was disappointing. It was possible that those precious magical items simply didn't spawn in the sewers. After he dealt with another group of mutated rats, a system notification emerged in his mind. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 8 to 9. You have gained 1 SP. Jake opted to allocate the skill point at a later time. At some point, he arrived at another 4-way juncture where a group of rats were scavenging through a pile of waste. Just as Jake was about to confront them, some noise echoed from a side tunnel. The rats instantly tensed up, raising their heads and turning their attention toward the source of the sound. A second later, a massive bear-like creature emerged from the shadows. It was the size of a grizzly bear, but had scales all over its body, and its head and tail were those of an alligator. Jake summoned its state with a thought. Devourer, level 15. Special ability, none. The mutated rats scattered at the sight of the huge monster, sending splashes of dirty water flying everywhere. The Devourer made to give chase, but then it noticed Jake. Its sinister red eyes studied him for a moment. Apparently unimpressed, it released a deafening roar before lunging toward him. Jake watched as the Devourer ran toward him, splashing stinky water everywhere. Despite its bulky body, the bear alligator moved surprisingly fast. When it got within biting distance, the monster snapped its long jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth at him with lightning speed. Yet Jake was quicker, dashing to the side before the creature's teeth could sink into him. The beast let out a frustrating roar before turning to face him once more. As it turned out, the monster was quite clumsy and sluggish, unable to turn quickly. Jake circled the huge creature and lashed out at its side. His claws scraped against the tough scales, dealing little to no damage to the monster. Caught off by the ineffective attack, he froze for a second. Then the Devourer finally completed its turn, slamming into him with such force Jake was knocked over. He collapsed to the floor, sending splashes of stinky water flying every which way. Jake was stunned for a moment, amazed by the sheer strength of his opponent. The beast wasted no time barreling toward him, its jaws opening in preparation to clamp down on him. Jake managed to roll to the side just in time, hearing a resounding clack as the alligator jaws snapped shut on the empty space he'd occupied a fraction of a second before. As he circled the huge monster, Jake unleashed a relentless barrage of strikes on the beast's body, exerting all his strength to penetrate its resilient scaled skin. He felt a sense of satisfaction when he managed to draw blood from the creature. Despite the Devourer's tough skin, he found that with enough force, he could pierce its scales with his claws, though it required more effort than his usual confrontations with other mutants. The battle dragged on for 10 grueling minutes, displaying the Devourer's impressive strength and endurance. Even when it was profusely bleeding from multiple wounds Jake had inflicted on it, the beast refused to yield and continued to fight. Jake was as agile and swift as always, constantly moving around the creature to stay beyond the reach of its lightning-fast jaws. The beast proved to be extremely strong and surprisingly fast when moving in a straight line, but its sluggishness during turns allowed Jake to easily dodge its snapping jaws. When the devourer finally collapsed to the watery floor, creating a chaotic explosion of wet splashes, Jake finally allowed himself to relax. Physically, he didn't feel tired, but mentally, he was exhausted. The fight with the devourer was intense indeed. Enemy killed. Plus 90 XP. Jake couldn't help but feel disappointed at the meager 90 XP he gained from defeating the devourer, considering how much time and effort he'd invested in the battle. Yet he had no choice but to begrudgingly accept the outcome. Taking a moment to catch his breath, so to speak, and recuperate from the exhausting fight, he then randomly picked a direction and pressed on with his exploration of the treacherous sewers. Over the next 2 to 3 hours, he roamed the dark, damp tunnels, engaging in combat with their unsettling dwellers. So far, he'd encountered only 2 types of mutants in that place: mutated rats and bear alligators called devourers. Compared to ex-human walkers, mutated rats were somewhat more difficult to kill. To slay a walker, he only needed to slash his claws across its throat. The body of a mutated rat, on the other hand, was more resistant to damage, requiring him to exert a little more effort. Nevertheless, dealing with groups of mutated rats posed no challenge to him. A devourer was a much more challenging opponent, however. Its scaled skin was hard to penetrate, and as Jake had recently learned, this type of monster could take a lot of damage before dying. Despite its massive body, a devourer could move at an impressive pace in a straight line and snap its alligator jaws with lightning speed. It was a bit clumsy and couldn't turn its body quickly, though. In the recent fight with a devourer, Jake had no trouble circling the monster and launching attacks on the creature's vulnerable sides. But as he'd also learned, its scaled skin was surprisingly tough and hard to penetrate. His claws had no trouble tearing ex-human flesh to shreds, but slicing open a devourer's scaled skin had turned out to be a lot harder. For that reason, Jake wanted to avoid having to get into confrontations with devourers as much as possible. They weren't all that dangerous for him, but slaying one consumed too much time and energy, while the experience reward for it was only 90 XP. Jake would rather deal with 3 mutated rats, investing much less time and effort but yielding higher experience rewards in return. As it turned out, it was nearly impossible to sneak past devourers in the close confines of the underground tunnels without being noticed by them. The waterlogged tunnel floors made silent movement impossible, and the devourer's acute senses made detection inevitable. Despite Jake's efforts to remain silent and evade a devourer's sight, the slightest disturbance in the water from his movements betrayed his presence. As soon as a devourer spotted him, it immediately charged at him at full speed. So even though he was reluctant to waste time and energy engaging in combat with those powerful and damage-resistant monsters, he had no choice but to confront them. At least, there were much fewer devourers in the sewers than mutated rats, and the former always prowled the water-filled tunnels alone. Navigating through the sewers, Jake relied on his enhanced intelligence skill to prevent getting lost. It seemed as though this skill was creating a mental map in his mind, allowing him to consult it whenever he needed to orient himself. It was truly impressive how this skill worked. Without it, he would easily have gotten lost in the maze-like underground tunnels. At some point, he came upon a peculiarly ornamented door. Coming to a halt in front of it, he gazed in awe at the towering double-leafed door adorned with intricate patterns. It was very tall and seemed to be crafted from some metallic material. Intricate runes were etched in the 4 corners of the door's surface. From the center of the double door protruded a prominent relief sculpture depicting the skull of some beast or demon with sharp fangs and long horns. The hollow eye sockets of the skull appeared to stare directly at him. For a moment, Jake just studied the door, looking at the demon skull in the middle, the intricate relief work, and the mysterious runes etched in its corners. Jake was getting more and more convinced that the door led to some kind of dungeon. The door lacked a handle, but it had a big keyhole. The key that opened this door should be pretty large. Jake was pretty sure the door was locked, but he tried to open it anyway. He pressed his palms against both leaves of the door and pushed. Just as he predicted, it didn't budge, despite his best efforts. It looked like the door couldn't be forced open even with his mutant strength, but just to be sure, he decided to try one more time, exerting all his mutant might. As he did so, a piece of text materialized in his mind. You need a skeleton key to open a dungeon door. Jake took a step back, staring at the demon skull in the center of the door. He gave a mental command to appraise the door, and a piece of information surfaced in his mind. Name, the Maze of Torment. Floors, 5. Recommended level, 15 to 20. So this door led to a dungeon. This discovery excited Jake a great deal. A dungeon meant lots of challenging enemies and lots of experience points along with other rewards. He had no skeleton key on him and had no idea where or how to acquire one yet, but he was sure he would find out at some point. When he got his hands on the key, he would return to the entrance. Turning away from the dungeon door, Jake strode away, continuing to explore the damp, reeking sewers and wondering what else he might find in that place. After departing from the dungeon door, Jake roamed the sewers for a couple more hours. He engaged in combat with every group of mutated rats he came upon. Now and then, he stumbled across a devourer and had to fight it as well. At some point, a system notification popped up in his mind. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 9 to 10. You have gained 1 SP. Jake now had 2 skill points at his disposal, so he decided to take a moment to allocate them. First of all, he checked his attributes. Body was at 3, mind was at 1, and magic was at 1 too. He had recently advanced enhanced senses, enhanced agility, and enhanced intelligence each to rank 2, so they were slowly progressing. They were at 22%, 31%, and 15% respectively. After he elevated them to the next level, each of these 3 skills had become more acute and powerful. His claws ability, however, remained at rank I, and because of that, the progression bar for the ability was still stuck at 100%. A thought occurred to him that if he raised the ability to the next rank, perhaps his claws would become strong enough to penetrate the devourer's scaled skin much more easily. He focused on the ability. Claws, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 1 of 3, common. He shifted his gaze to the rank of the claws ability, and a piece of additional information emerged. A raise to the next rank is available. Requirements, body 5. Cost, 1 SP. Raise to rank 2, Y/N. He wanted to increase its rank, but he didn't meet the requirements to do that just yet, with body standing at only 3. He could invest both his current skill points into that attribute, and after he leveled up again, he would be able to raise claws to rank 2. However, after giving the matter some thought, he decided to do something else. Instead of allotting the skill points to his attributes, for now, he opted to acquire some upgrades for his skills and abilities. He accessed the upgrade menu for his current soul combat ability. Ability, Claws. Upgrade options, common. 1. Strengthen claws to cut through solid materials like metal. Cost, 1 SP. 2. Extend claws by 2 inches, for increased reach. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Significantly reduce transformation time from hands to claws. Cost, already owned. Having previously obtained the reduced transformation time upgrade, Jake now had 2 additional options to choose from. He didn't see much reason to increase the length of his claws, at least for now, so he went with the first option. He opened his eyes and morphed his hands into claws. They did look nastier now. While their length remained the same, they now appeared more intimidating. He closed his eyes and called up his stats once more. He had another skill point to allocate, which he wanted to use to acquire another upgrade for enhanced agility. Upgrade options, common. 1. Master acrobatic skills for climbing, jumping, performing aerial maneuvers, and navigating challenging terrain. Cost, already owned. 2. Enhance body coordination for faster movement and speed by 20% as well as executing rapid directional changes. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Sharpen reflexes for quicker reactions in combat, enabling agile dodges, swift maneuvers, and precise counterattacks. Cost, 1 SP. The decision was made pretty quickly. He allocated the skill point to the third option, to sharpen his reflexes. It would definitely make him even more dangerous in combat than before. With that, both skill points were allocated. Before opening his eyes, he took a moment to review his stats. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 10. HP, 100%. XP, 20/1375. SP, 0. MP, 1025. Body, 3. Mind, 1. Magic, 1. Claws, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 2 of 3, common. Enhanced senses, rank 2, 22%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. Enhanced agility, rank 2, 31%. Upgrades, 2 of 3, common. Enhanced intelligence, rank 2, 15%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. After that, he opened his eyes and continued to explore the sewers. Now and then, he encountered mutated rats and engaged them. The newly acquired upgrade for enhanced agility made him even more agile in combat. The mutated rats deftly attacked him from several directions, but he swiftly dodged every attack and retaliated with lightning speed. At some point, he encountered another devourer. He charged at the huge monster, eager to test his strengthened claws on it. As it turned out, with the recently acquired upgrade, his talons improved significantly. Slicing through the monster's tough scaled skin effortlessly dealing with a devourer was now a much easier and faster task. The upgrade had proven to be completely worth the skill point invested in it. After spending a few hours in the foul-smelling sewers, Jake realized that the underground tunnels were not as extensive as he had initially believed. More often than not, he encountered blocked paths obstructed by massive piles of concrete and rebar collapsed from the streets above and was forced to backtrack and search for alternate routes. Eventually, every available tunnel had been explored, every creature slain, and the splashes from his footsteps were now the only sounds to be heard. It was time to ascend back to the street level. It should be evening now. Tomorrow, when the system refreshed the world, respawning monsters and loot, he might return to the sewers to gain more XP. For now, there was nothing left to do down here, so he headed back to the section of the sewers where the ceiling was split open by huge cracks. Thanks to his enhanced intelligence skill, Jake easily retraced his steps back through the sewers. As he made his way back, he took a moment to evaluate his remaining mana. MP, 935. It was quite low. He recalled his previous calculations on the amount of mana his body consumed in idle and active states in a day. At level 3, he estimated using about 1080 MP daily while physically and mentally active. However, now that he'd leveled up a few times, increased his skills and ranks, and acquired upgrades for some of them, he needed a significantly higher amount of mana on a daily basis to support his increased capabilities. Finally, he reached a tunnel with a split-open ceiling. Only he quickly discovered he couldn't jump high enough to reach the edge. He continued exploring until he stumbled upon another crack where sturdy vines cascaded down from above. He took hold of two of them and tugged to test their strength. They seemed tough enough to bear his weight, so used them to deftly ascend back to the street level. Upon reaching the surface, he took a moment to survey his surroundings to reorient himself. The street he stood on was quiet, and not a single mutant was in sight. As he'd predicted, the evening had arrived. The sun was setting, gradually casting the city into shadows. He picked a direction and set off on the mana hunt. Jake swiftly moved through the night streets at his usual brisk jog. He'd opted not to scale the buildings for two key reasons. First, mana consumables tended to spawn on the first floors of the high-rises, likely because many of the buildings had all their stairs completely destroyed, rendering access to the upper floors for regular survivors nearly impossible. Second, leaping from rooftop to rooftop consumed too much mana, and since he had only a small amount of that precious energy left, he couldn't afford to waste it carelessly. As always, at midnight, the system initiated the world refresh. As he jogged through the desolate streets, here and there, he spotted mutants materializing out of thin air. Now and then, enemies appeared right next to him, immediately trying to grab at him with their clawed hands. Jake paid them no mind, however, evading their claws and not slowing down. He was solely focused on his quest for mana, disregarding any other distractions. He was sure the same process was occurring with loot, although it wasn't immediately apparent since various items usually appeared inside buildings, abandoned cars, or some other concealed spots. The city was mostly quiet now, with the majority of the survivors having retreated to their shelters for the night. Unlike them, Jake didn't need to sleep or rest, which worked to his great advantage. While most survivors rested, all the loot in the city belonged to him. Not that he needed most of it. The only thing he was interested in were mana consumables. Their spawn rate was pretty low, but with the majority of survivors having holed up in their dens, he anticipated gathering a substantial amount of mana. Jake noticed that while the system kept refreshing the world, mutants materialized sporadically at different moments of time instead of appearing all at once at the same moment. About an hour later, the process seemed to be finished as he could no longer spot any mutants popping up anywhere. He continued to explore the night city, venturing into random buildings in search of mana. Now and then, he came across beads, each providing 100 MP, and marbles that offered 250 MP. A couple of times, he found a shard carrying 500 mana points. Jake immediately absorbed the magic energy from every mana consumable he discovered. At some point, he chanced upon a mana chunk. While beads, marbles, and shards were of common rarity, the mana chunk was uncommon, containing 1000 MP. It was a really good find. Jake had brought his mana to over 3000 by now. Hunting for mana at midnight while most survivors rested had proven to be entirely worthwhile. He intended to dedicate the remainder of the night to looking for mana to collect as much of this magical energy as possible. He entered another high-rise building and found himself in a vast room that had once served as the lobby of a hotel. Unlike many other buildings he'd explored, this one remained relatively intact, lacking large piles of debris and significant damage to the ceiling and walls. As he stealthily moved through the vast dark room adorned with several columns, he surveyed the area. He noticed that all the stairs leading to the upper floors lay in ruins. At first glance, there weren't any mana consumables anywhere in sight, but to know for sure, he needed to conduct a more thorough search. He almost reached the center of the vast room when he heard a suspicious sound. He froze in his tracks, dropping close to the floor. He quickly looked around and almost immediately identified the source of the sounds. His gaze quickly landed on a group of survivors resting in one of the corners of the room, at the farther wall from the entrance. Even though it was very dark in the room, with hardly any moonlight filtering in through the windows, Jake's keen eyesight allowed him to take in all the details at once. There were 4 of them, 2 were tucked in sleeping bags, while 2 others were crouched by the windows, keeping guard. They seemed to be rotating shifts for any potential mutant attacks throughout the night. Their backpacks lined the wall, and the 2 guards held their weapons close while the 2 sleeping people had their guns lying on the floor within easy reach. The sounds that Jake's acute sense of hearing had picked up were the hushed conversation of the 2 guards. They spoke in muted tones, being careful not to disturb their sleeping companions. Despite being vigilant, none of them spotted Jake crouching in the center of the vast room. He always moved almost soundlessly, and when he needed to, he could move completely silently. Not knowing what dangers lay within the building, he'd taken precautions to remain as quiet as possible. Their eyes also let them down. They sat facing each other, so at least one of them should be able to see the center of the room in their peripheral vision, yet they failed to see him. Jake's dark skin blended in with the surrounding darkness perfectly, rendering him practically invisible. So yeah, the survivors didn't have the slightest idea that an extremely dangerous predator was studying them at that moment. The 2 guards had one job, and they had already failed it, allowing him to get into the building and get dangerously close to them. If he chose to, he could dash toward them with minimal noise and reach them within seconds. By the time they eventually spotted him, it would be too late for them to do anything to save themselves. Jake remained where he was, though. Since the 4 of them had taken refuge in that building, they had likely searched it. If there were any mana consumables, they had collected them and most likely immediately absorbed the precious magical energy from them. Therefore, there seemed to be no reason to linger in that building any longer. However, out of curiosity, Jake decided to stay there for a moment. He wanted to know what the 2 guards were whispering about. Even though they talked to each other very quietly and were at least 15 yards away from him, his acute sense of hearing allowed him to discern every word they uttered. "I think it's over," one of the guards said. "The system's finished refreshing the world." "Yep," the other one said, peering out the window he sat at. "I can't see any more mutants respawning anywhere either." "There should be plenty of loot out there right now," the first one said. "Maybe we should get out of here and go looking for it instead. Just imagine what treasures we can discover while most of the other survivors in the city are fast asleep." "We already discussed it, Thomas," the other one responded, a hint of irritation in his voice. "And we all reached a consensus that it's not safe to wander around the city at night. The darkness, especially within buildings, poses too great a threat. We already lost David one evening. That mutant jumped at him from the shadows, and he was dead before we got the chance to save him. Have you forgotten that already?" "No, Caleb, I haven't forgotten," Thomas replied grimly, shaking his head. "Poor David. I still can't believe he's gone. That's why we're gonna wait until night passes and head out for loot first thing in the morning, just as we always do," Caleb said. For a moment, they lapsed into silence. As Jake watched them, listening in on their hushed conversation, the beast within him seemed to awaken from its slumber. It wasted no time in beginning to whisper to him, trying to persuade him to attack the survivors. It told him that their backpacks that were lined along the wall potentially contained valuable mana consumables, so it could be worth slaying them, tearing all 4 of them to shreds. Not without some effort, but Jake managed to silence his inner beast. He was not going to kill the 4 survivors. Even if they had mana consumables in their backpacks, he wasn't going to do that. He wasn't going down the rabbit hole. He was already only partly human, and he wasn't willing to lose the last shreds of humanity within him. Jake was about to turn away and steal his way out of the building when Thomas, who was facing the center of the vast hall, suddenly turned his head to stare at the exact spot Jake occupied. He immediately froze, staring back at the survivor, ready to jump into action if necessary. However, while Thomas appeared a little more nervous than he'd been a second before, Jake was sure he remained undetected. Had Thomas somehow spotted him, his reaction would have been way more intense. "Shouldn't we also watch the entrance?" Thomas asked. "I mean, what if a mutant comes into the building?" Caleb shook his head. "We're at the farthest spot from the entrance. If a mutant happens to wander in and come at us, we'll hear it right away. Those creatures aren't known for being quiet." "Geez, what's wrong with you all of a sudden?" Caleb asked, raising his voice. One of the sleeping people stirred in their sleeping bag but didn't awaken. "I dunno, man," Thomas replied. "I just feel nervous for some reason. I feel like something is watching me." "You're just being paranoid," Caleb said without even bothering to look over his shoulder to see where Thomas was staring at. "Relax, man. First of all, the system has already finished refreshing the world. And second, mutants never materialize anywhere near survivors. By now, all of us have learned it. If that were the case, many survivors would have been torn apart in their sleep during the initial days, and we likely wouldn't have been an exception." "You're right," Thomas said after a brief pause, finally shifting his gaze away from Jake. "During the spawning process, mutants never pop up anywhere near us, survivors, whether we are asleep or awake. So don't worry about it anymore, bud." "Yeah." After that, the 2 survivors went silent once more. Jake continued crouching at the center of the hall with his palms resting on the floor, thinking about what he'd just heard from the 2 survivors. During the world refreshing process, the system spawned mutants at a safe distance from survivors. It made sense. The process typically took place at midnight when most survivors were probably going to sleep or were already fast asleep. It would be unfair if a mutant materialized next to a sleeping survivor, catching them off guard in their most vulnerable state. However, when Jake moved through the city, every now and then, mutants sporadically materialized right next to him. It couldn't be written off as a simple coincidence. It was pretty much obvious that the system didn't classify him as a survivor anymore. To the system, he was just another mutant now. However, it posed some questions. How come he was granted a unique progression system? Why was he still sentient while all the other mutants were not? The more Jake thought about it, the more confused he became. He'd been transformed into a mutant after being sucked into an anomaly known as the Dark Void. As far as he knew, he wasn't supposed to survive that, but somehow he did. The purpose of the Dark Void was to turn regular mutants into stronger versions of themselves. He'd been a human at that time, so he should have either been killed or, in the best-case scenario, turned into a mindless mutant. But not only did he retain his intelligence, but he was also given a system with unique abilities. Was it just a very rare fluke? Was it just an extremely rare occurrence? Or perhaps it was a glitch that somehow intertwined a survivor's progression system with mutant capabilities? While Jake remained uncertain about his situation, he at least now knew that he was regarded as a mutant rather than a survivor. Otherwise, it wouldn't have spawned mutants in such close proximity to him during the world-refreshing process. Even despite the fact that he greatly deviated from typical mutants in many aspects, possessing a unique progression system of his own, he still seemed to be categorized as a regular mutant. Or maybe while the system labeled him a mutant, it also recognized his uniqueness. Could it be that the system considered him a hybrid straddling the line between humans and mutants? Jake wasn't sure yet. A sudden scream shattered the silence, wrenching him back to the moment. One of the 2 people in the sleeping bags suddenly sat up, screaming and thrashing around as if he was fending off invisible enemies. The person next to him, who turned out to be a young woman, suddenly emerged from her sleeping bag as well, awakened by the noise. Instantly on high alert, Thomas and Caleb jumped to their feet, spinning around and raising their weapons, unsure what was going on. The man kept thrashing around, displaying signs of not being fully awake yet. He swung one of his arms in a wide arc, almost hitting the young woman on his left. "Geez, Eric, calm down," she exclaimed. "It's just a dream. Just a bad dream. You're safe. Nothing's gonna hurt you." Her voice seemed to have a calming effect on him, and Eric finally came to his senses. He stopped screaming and flailing his arms. He scanned his surroundings, turning his head to look at the woman next to him, then at the two men by the windows, who were still gripping their guns. He then surveyed the dark room, a perplexed expression on his face as if he couldn't apprehend where he was or how he'd ended up in that place. For a moment, his gaze lingered on the shadows at the center of the room, peering into the darkness. Although it felt as if he was staring right at him, Jake knew it wasn't possible. If Eric's limited human sight could discern him in the darkness, he would already have begun panicking again. Finally, Eric's eyes settled on the young woman sitting in her sleeping bag. "See," she said. "Everything's fine. You are among friends. Nothing to worry about." "I'm sorry for waking you, Avery," he said in an apologetic tone. "I was having a nightmare." "Figured as much," Avery said, nodding. Eric's gaze shifted to the two men standing by the windows on his right. "Sorry for startling you guys too," he said with a lopsided grin. "You can stop pointing your guns at me. I'm not gonna turn into a monster if that's what you think." "You scared the hell out of me, man," Thomas said, lowering his weapon. "I almost fucking shot you." "We were lucky there weren't any mutants nearby," Caleb said, peering out the window. "Otherwise, they would already have swarmed this place." "I saw David in my dream," Eric said quietly, looking at his hands in his lap. "I witnessed the moment when that mutant jumped from the shadows. Only in my dream, it was me who got attacked, not David." Avery gently placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. For a moment, Eric remained still, then he turned around and reached for one of the bags lined along the wall behind him. "What are you doing?" Avery asked. Eric was rummaging through the contents of his rucksack until he found what he was looking for. He retrieved some kind of bundle from his pack. Whatever it was large, tightly wrapped in a dark thick strip of fabric. "What is this?" Avery asked. "You'll see," Eric replied as he began to peel the fabric away from the item. Both Jake and Avery watched with interest as he was unwrapping the item. As it turned out, it was a huge mana consumable, resembling a crystal in its shape. It was almost a foot in length, larger than any other mana consumables Jake had ever seen. When the last coil of the thick dark fabric fell away, the magical energy stored within the crystal cast a bluish glow over the four survivors and the wall behind them, illuminating the entire section of the room where they were situated. Even from where he was crouching, Jake could tell there was plenty of magical energy stored inside the item. "Wow," Avery exclaimed, staring in awe at the mana consumable. "It's so bright." "That's why I usually keep it wrapped in fabric," Eric explained. "It gives off so much light it can easily attract mutants at night." "It's beautiful," Avery said, staring at the crystal in Eric's hands. "Yes, it is," he replied. "I've never seen such a large mana item," Caleb said from his position at one of the windows. "What is it?" "It's called a mana crystal," Eric replied. "It's a rare mana consumable." "How much mana does it hold?" Thomas asked. 5,000. "Wow, that's a lot." Jake was impressed too. As a mutant, he spent a lot of time scouring the city for any mana consumables, but he'd never chanced upon a mana crystal before. That item must have been really rare. According to Eric, it held a whopping 5,000 MP, which was even more than the amount of mana currently stored within him, over 3,000 MP. Between that and the 5,000 the mana crystal held, he could potentially unlock 2 or 3 of the abilities from the genetic development interface. "Why haven't you absorbed the mana from it yet?" Thomas asked. "I can't," Eric replied. "Why?" "Because you need to be at least level 15 to do that. I learned that after scanning the crystal with my PDA when I just found it. I tried to absorb the mana anyway, but nothing happened, of course." "Guess you'll have to wait until you level up to 15 before you're allowed to absorb the mana," Avery said. "Yeah. Only I'm not gonna do that." "Why not?" Avery said, a surprised look on her face. Eric lowered his gaze to the crystal he held in his hand. "Because it's so beautiful it calms me," Eric said, peering into the crystal. When I'm stressed out, I take out the crystal and watch the energy dance inside of it. It has a soothing effect on me. It really helps me to calm my nerves in moments like this. I don't know how I'd manage without it. Where did you find it? Caleb asked. I don't even remember. In one of the buildings, I guess. It happened a few days ago, before I even met you guys. Well, guess you were extremely lucky to find such a rare mana item. Jake agreed with Caleb. Such things didn't lie around every corner. The mere fact that he himself had never come across a mana crystal spoke volumes about the item's rarity. That was why he was planning to snatch the crystal from Eric's hands. It might be a little cruel considering the crystal helped Eric calm his nerves in stressful situations, but Jake couldn't let such a great opportunity to get so much mana slip away. Sorry, buddy, but you're gonna have to get yourself another stress buster. And Jake broke into a silent sprint toward the 4 survivors. Jake swiftly ran toward the group of survivors. The bluish glow from the crystal in Eric's hands cast light every which way, making it impossible for Jake to remain undetected for long. Avery noticed him from the corner of her eye and turned her head to look in his direction. What the hell? Thomas muttered, spotting him as well. It's a mutant. Where'd it come from? It's moving so fast, Avery gasped. Even though the survivors noticed him sooner than he'd hoped, it didn't matter much. Jake sprinted so fast he was on top of the 2 survivors in their sleeping bags, before they could even reach for their weapons. Eric cowered in fear as Jake loomed over him, staring up at the black mutant with wide eyes. Instead of going for his gun lying next to his sleeping bag, he tightened his grip on the mana crystal, holding it close to his chest. It wasn't that he sensed Jake's intentions, but rather an instinctive move. As Jake reached down, Eric recoiled backward, but he was too slow to evade Jake's grasp. He closed his black-textured hands around the glowing crystal and pulled. Eric held on to his precious mana consumable with all his might, and for the briefest of seconds, Jake felt a bit of resistance. Still, Eric's feeble human body was no match for Jake's strength. He tugged a bit harder and almost effortlessly wrenched the crystal from Eric's grasp. No, he screamed, seemingly more terrified about his precious mana crystal being taken from him than by the terrifying-looking mutant who had seized it. Jake's expanded field of vision allowed him to see the female survivor, Avery, still sitting in her sleeping bag on his right, and the other 2 men, Thomas and Caleb, standing by the windows off to his left. He could see the 2 men bring up their guns to aim at him, and he immediately spun in place to face them, ready to confront them if necessary. However, they refrained from opening fire, and he understood why. He stood too close to Eric, and there was also Avery behind him. They were reluctant to open fire while he stood so close to them, fearing accidentally wounding their friends. Suddenly, a booming gunshot echoed from behind him, and in the next instant, he felt something punch him in the back, causing him to stagger. Furious, he wheeled around to see Avery holding a huge revolver resembling a Colt python in a 2-handed grip, with smoke drifting up from its muzzle. Her facial expression clearly conveyed her disbelief at how he nonchalantly shrugged off the blast from such a powerful handgun. Then determination sparked in her eyes as her index finger whitened, tightening around the trigger of the huge revolver once more. A fraction of a second before she fired, Jake leaped out of her line of fire, throwing his body sideways. The bullet whizzed past him, missing him by a hair's breadth. A panicked scream erupted behind him, accompanied by the shatter of a window. Jake didn't need to glance back to know that the shot Avery had just fired almost hit one of the men standing by the windows behind him. Avery stared up at Jake with a dumbfounded look on her face. His lightning speed and incredible resistance to damage left her stunned. "What the hell are you?" was clearly written on her face. "You're about to find out, bitch," Jake thought. Only it wasn't exactly his thinking. His inner beast had awakened when a bullet had torn into his back, and now the monster within him craved blood. It growled within him, urging him to charge at the survivors and tear them apart. Jake was terrified to realize that deep down, it was what he too desired most at the moment. Yet he knew he couldn't give in to the urges of his inner beast. To preserve his humanity, he had to fight against his dark impulses. Jake spun toward the exit of the building and bolted across the hall, clutching the mana crystal tightly in one hand. As he distanced himself from the survivors, they unleashed a hail of bullets at him. The rounds whizzed by like enraged hornets, one managing to graze his back and further enraging his inner beast. But Jake didn't slow down or look back, sprinting through the near darkness of the building. The radiant glow of the crystal made him a clear target, but his speed outpaced their aim, allowing him to evade their relentless gunfire. Within seconds, Jake reached the entrance. Just before he burst out of the building, he heard one of the survivors exclaim to the others, "Guys, what the hell was that thing?" Then he was out of the building, jogging through the night streets overgrown with vegetation, noting that the survivors made no attempt to pursue him. He pushed on for a few blocks before gradually slowing to a stop at a deserted four-way intersection. He scanned his surroundings for any threats, but didn't spot any. He raised the mana consumable to his eyes. It really was giving off a lot of bluish light. It was understandable why Eric had kept the crystal tightly wrapped in a dark, thick piece of fabric. For a moment, Jake just watched the bluish energy dance and swirl within the crystal. Eric had been right. It was beautiful. Despite its beauty, Jake knew he had a more practical purpose for the crystal, unlike Eric's sentimentality toward it. He then gave a mental command to appraise the item. Its stats instantly emerged in his mind. Mana crystal, 5000 MP, rare. He then checked the amount of mana he currently had. MP, 3815. After consuming the energy from the crystal, he would possess over 8000 MP, allowing him to unlock 2 or even 3 new abilities. If he could use the mana crystal at the moment, that is. Eric had told his friends that he hadn't been able to absorb the mana from the crystal because he needed to be at least level 15 to do that. Perhaps it was the case with Jake as well. He tightened his grip around the crystal, testing its strength. Surprisingly, it didn't shatter under his pressure, suggesting it was either more durable than other mana consumables or required him to reach level 15 to use it. However, nothing had been mentioned about the requirement to reach level 15 before being able to use the crystal in the description of the item he'd summoned a moment before. Perhaps, unlike survivors, he could use the crystal. So he tried again, exerting more strength this time. There was a moment of resistance, and then the crystal finally broke in his grip. The bluish energy escaped from the cracks, flowing toward Jake's arm and assimilating into his black flesh. It took a few moments for the abundant mana to transfer from the crystal into him, filling him with its power. After the absorption process was complete, Jake opened his hand, and the now empty, shattered crystal dropped to the asphalt below. Now, it was time for him to acquire some new abilities with the mana he'd gained. For a moment, Jake stood in the middle of the four-way intersection, surveying his surroundings. While there were no enemies to be seen or heard anywhere, standing in the open while unlocking new abilities probably wasn't such a good idea. Although he possessed remarkable damage resistance, capable of enduring even a blast from a heavy-caliber weapon, there was no reason to take unnecessary risks. Recalling having been shot by the female survivor named Avery, he lingered for a moment longer, concentrating on his sensations. He could tell that the bullet wound in his back had nearly healed by that point, stemming the leakage of mana. Sure enough, some amount of his mana had been used to seal the wound and dissolve the heavy-caliber round lodged in his flesh into nothingness, but fortunately, not too much. He glanced around once more, before dashing to the corner of the street where a small demolished diner sat. Passing through the threshold, he entered the main area of the dinner. A long dusty counter lined one wall while tables adorned the opposite side, with shattered windows offering a view outside. Jake crossed the room and stepped into the darkest corner of the room, blending in with the shadows. He then turned around to face the exit and closed his eyes, summoning the skill store with a thought. Genetic Development Interface. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Abilities, 1 of 4. Skills, 3 of 7. Ability, Smash Fists. Requirements, Body 2. Cost, 2000 MP. Ability, Swords. Requirements, Body 3. Cost, 2000 MP. Ability, Bladed Tentacles. Requirements, Body 2, Magic 1. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Strength. Requirements, Body 5. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Reflexes. Requirements, Body 5, Mind 3. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Feral Instincts. Requirements, Mind 5, Magic 3. Cost, 4000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Regeneration. Requirements, Body 7, Magic 5, Mind 3. Cost, 5000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Senses. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, Enhanced Agility. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, enhanced intelligence. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Ability, claws. Requirements, body 1. Cost, already owned. With over 8,000 MP at his disposal, Jake could unlock up to 3 abilities. However, he was cautious about depleting his mana reserves, even more so now that his body demanded much more mana for sustenance than before. So out of the 8,000 MP he currently had, he opted to spend only 5 and keep the rest. After examining the list of available abilities, he decided to unlock swords and bladed tentacles. He had set his eyes on the former a long time ago, but until now, hadn't had a chance to unlock this ability. As for the latter, it had recently been added to the skill store after he completed a mutation research quest. Now he could finally unlock this ability as well. He took a moment to read the descriptions and requirements of both these abilities. Ability, Swords. Description: the mutant can grow sharp, double-edged blades from their hands, which can cut through any organic enemies, making them a dangerous opponent in any fight. Upgrades: 0 of 3, common. Requirements: body 3. Cost: 2,000 MP. Ability: bladed tentacles. Description: the mutant can grow long, sharp tentacles from their back that can swiftly slash through enemies, giving them a powerful advantage in close combat situations. Upgrades: 0 of 3, common. Requirements: body 2, magic 1. Cost: 3,000 MP. With his body attribute at level 3 and magic at level 1, Jake met the necessary requirements for both abilities. One by one, he acquired both of them, first unlocking swords, and then bladed tentacles, spending a total of 5,000 MP. He now had over 3,000 MP left. He opened his eyes and stepped into the middle of the diner. He brought up his arms and gave a mental command to transform them into swords. He wasn't sure what exactly was going to happen, but he anticipated his hands to be turned into swords. However, something a little different happened. The blades actually extended from the tops of his wrists instead. Jake watched with fascination as his black flesh molded and elongated as if it were clay being sculpted into blades. It took a few seconds for the transformation to complete, which was longer than he expected. He took a moment to examine the blades. They were about 15 inches in length and 2 inches in width. Perhaps he could make them longer by unlocking one of the upgrades to this ability. He was pretty much sure that, as with the claws ability, the transformation time could also be decreased. Jake then experimented for a moment with his blades. He tried to retract the one extending from his left wrist, and it worked. Realizing he didn't have to turn both his hands into swords, he then tried morphing his left hand into claws, and it worked as well. So he had the option to morph one hand into claws and extend a blade from the other, without needing to turn both hands into either swords or claws. Whether there was a practical purpose to that, he didn't know yet. He guessed he would find out during many future battles against different enemies. He then gave a mental command for both his hands to revert to their normal form. While the claws on his left hand morphed back into normal human-looking fingers almost immediately, it took a few seconds for the sword extending from his right wrist to retract. It was somewhat frustrating, but it would do for now. He was sure he would be able to reduce the transformation time when he unlocked one of the upgrades for the sword's ability. Since he currently didn't have any skill points at his disposal, he decided not to waste any time examining the available upgrades for the ability. After that, Jake tested out the other newly acquired ability. With a mental command, he grew a tentacle from his body. He could feel his flesh in the area of his shoulder blade stretching out to form a long appendage. Unlike the swords, the tentacle took only 2 seconds to fully grow from his upper back. He was taken aback by how effortlessly he could move the tentacle, as though it had always been a natural extension of his body. It seamlessly integrated into his body, allowing him to feel and manipulate it with ease. Although he couldn't see it behind his back, once he brought it to the side of his body, he immediately saw it slither within his expanded field of vision. He maneuvered it closer to his face for a clearer view. The dark, textured tentacle terminated in a sharp, double-edged blade. It was a formidable weapon, and he was surprised by how quickly he could maneuver it. Giving it a few experimental swings around the room, he then extended it to its full length to gauge its reach, approximately 3 feet. Then something unexpected happened. The tentacle suddenly detached from his body and dropped to the floor. Jake watched as it withered and changed color to gray. In just a few seconds, the detached tentacle disintegrated into dust. The tentacle couldn't survive the separation from his body. While it was a part of him, it was sustained by the mana accumulated within him. Without that life-giving energy, it quickly disintegrated into dust. Jake realized that the same would happen to him if he ever depleted his mana reserves. He couldn't survive without that magical energy, so if he ever ran out of it, he would be reduced to nothing more than a pile of gray dust. Jake was determined to evade such a grim fate at all costs. He continued to explore his newfound ability by growing another tentacle from his body. He wanted to see how many tentacles he could have at the same time, so he gave a mental command to grow yet another one. However, nothing happened, which meant that he could produce only one tentacle at a time, at least, for the time being. After a few moments, the tentacle detached from his body by itself and fell to the floor, meeting the same fate as the previous one, disintegrating into dust. He was sure he could extend the lifespan of his tentacles by acquiring some of the upgrades for the ability. Before departing the diner, Jake quickly checked his mana reserves, about 3,500. Sure enough, each time he created a tentacle or transformed his hands, a certain amount of mana was consumed, reminding him of the importance of managing his energy wisely. After that, Jake departed the ruined diner, stepping out into the night. Jake spent the rest of the night scouring the city in search of mana. By the time the morning sun began to bathe the streets in its light, he'd accumulated about 5,500 mana points, which wasn't bad at all. This amount alone could sustain him for a couple of days, or even longer if he reduced his usual level of activity. He had enough mana to unlock at least one more new ability, but he chose not to do it for the time being. He had recently acquired swords and bladed tentacles, so he first wanted to test them out in combat. After he got the hang of using them, he could acquire another ability. There were some skills available for purchase in the genetic development interface as well. Unlike abilities, skills were passive, but Jake decided not to spend any more of his MP for now either. For his current level, the 5,000 MP he currently possessed wasn't all that much. He could easily deplete more than half of this amount in a single day if he engaged in overly energetic activities, like constantly running through the deserted city and battling mutants on end. With each level up, his body and abilities required more energy to support his increased capabilities on a daily basis. Therefore, he should manage his mana reserves very wisely. As morning arrived, survivors began to emerge from their hideouts to begin a new day of scavenging and fighting mutants. Jake's keen hearing picked up the sporadic sounds of gunfire echoing from different parts of the city. Given this, he opted to halt his search for mana consumables for the day. During the night, he'd explored many buildings, having found and used quite a lot of mana items. The immense size of the city rendered it impossible for Jake to explore every part of it in a single night, so there were still numerous locations within the city that Jake hadn't visited during the night. However, with the survivors now roaming the streets too, if he continued to search for mana, encountering them would be unavoidable. Jake wanted to avoid getting into fights with them as much as possible. Not that he was afraid of them or anything. Quite the opposite, in fact, he was well aware of how easily he could dispatch human beings. But the only thing he would accomplish by doing so was waking up his inner beast, and that was something he wanted to prevent from happening. His dark impulses had to be kept in check. Jake made the decision to postpone his search for mana and wait for another nightfall. At midnight, the system would refresh the world, respawning mutants and replenishing it with valuable items once again. That was the best time to search for mana. During the daytime, he could focus on fighting mutants to gain XP, and the best place to do so was the sewers, at least for the time being. The system should have respawned all the mutated rats and bear alligators called devourers in the underground tunnels, so there would be plenty of XP for him to gain below the city. Scouring the city for MP at night and hunting sewer monsters for XP during the daytime seemed like a solid plan to him. For now, it appeared the most productive way to gain mana and XP. And after he made his way to a new location, he would come up with a different plan. However, before heading to the section of the city that granted access to the sewers, Jake wanted to test out his recently acquired abilities on some weaker types of mutants. He jogged through the city until he chanced upon a high-rise building infested with walkers and leapers. None of the survivors had found and cleared this place during this morning yet, so it was brimming with mutants. Jake extended blades from both his hands and entered the main area on the first floor, spotting replication pods hanging from the ceiling here and there. The place was packed with mutants, a sight that excited him a great deal. Once ex-humans inside the room spotted Jake, they rushed toward him from every direction. The first one to reach him outstretched its hands to grab him the second he was within reach. One of his blades flicked through the air, chopping off the mutant's hands at the wrists. Jake then jumped aside, and the mutant, carried by its momentum, fell forward. The mutant struck the floor head first with enough force to smash its own skull open like an overripe melon being hit by a sledgehammer. Another walker leaped at Jake. He sidestepped its attack as one of his blades struck, opening up its guts. Purple, gore-smeared strands spilled from the gash across its stomach onto the floor, coiling around the creature's legs. Caught up in its own entrails, the walker awkwardly tried to turn and reach for him again. A second swipe of his blade took the creature's head from its shoulders to send it bouncing along the floor. Jake blocked the swiping claws of another walker with one of his blades, severing some of the creature's elongated fingers in the process. The walker recoiled back from him. Jake shoved one of his blades through its heart. The creature looked down at its chest, then Jake yanked his blade free, and the walker collapsed, dead. The claws of yet another walker lashed out, swiping toward him. He easily dodged the attack and countered with one of his swords. His right blade flashed through the air, sinking into the flesh of the creature's arm. Bone crunched, and the mutant's arm was severed from its body, close to the elbow. The arm flopped wetly onto the floor as the creature snarled at him in fury. Jake pressed his attack, closing in for the kill. His left blade lashed out, catching the creature across its throat and opening it up. The mutant's foul blood splattered over him before the ex-human collapsed. Jake quickly looked around, hearing howling and screeching sounds in the distance. There were no more mutants in the room, but somewhere in the other parts of the building lurked several more mutants. He could hear the pounding of their footfalls, converging on his spot. Jake continued to stand in the middle of the vast room. He didn't have to wait long. Several more ex-humans emerged from different corridors and charged at him all at once. The first one to reach him outstretched its clawed hands toward him. Easily evading them, Jake attacked, his right blade entering the creature's stomach. He then jerked the blade upward, opening up the creature from the sword's point of entry to the edge of its sternum. The mutant twitched on his blade, trying to tear free of it as spittle flew from its lips, thrashing around more in rage than in pain. Jake jerked his blade free of the mutant's body. The ex-human flopped onto the floor, making a grab for his ankles, despite the amount of damage he'd inflicted on it. He quickly finished it off with a powerful stab through its skull and then spun toward two more walkers as they lunged at him. His blade split open the nose of one of them and then slashed into the second walker's snarling mouth on its back swing. The blade of his sword removed several of the walker's many razor-sharp teeth and part of its open lower jaw. The creature stumbled, tumbling back onto the floor. The other walker shook off the pain from its mangled nose and came at him once more. The blade of his sword entered the underside of the monster's chin. Its tip emerged through the top of the mutant's skull, sealing its mouth shut and destroying its brain. He yanked the sword free from the mutant, and its body collapsed to the floor. Jake instantly spun to face the other walkers that came at him. He continued to fight the remaining ex-humans until there were no more left. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 325 XP. Jake had killed 28 ex-humans in total, without breaking a sweat. The floor was littered with mutilated bodies of the dead mutants. Among them, there were a few leapers, while the rest were walkers. He brought up his swords to take a look at them. They had proved to be quite effective weapons. In one of the future fights, he was going to transform one hand into a sword and the other into claws to test out the effectiveness of this combination. Also, he hadn't yet utilized his bladed tentacles in combat and was eager to see how it would perform in one of the next fights. After destroying all the replication pods hanging from the ceiling to earn some additional XP, Jake exited the building and headed for the sewers. Jake traversed the streets, illuminated by the gentle morning light. The chilly wind stirred the weeds breaking through the cracks in the asphalt and swayed the vines cascading down the building fronts. The echoes of gunfire resonated from various parts of the city. In this world altered by the system, guns generated much less noise, a stark contrast to when Jake was a human survivor and rarely heard gunfire unless in close proximity. Now, as a mutant, his acute hearing allowed him to easily detect distant gunshots. As the day progressed, more survivors emerged from their hideouts to begin a new day of scavenging and battling mutants. While they posed little threat to him, Jake planned to avoid confrontations with humans as much as possible. He gained nothing from killing them. Waking up his inner beast was also something he wanted to avoid at all costs. However, as the day unfolded, evading survivors was becoming more challenging. He sprinted through the streets at impressive speed, covering one block after another, occasionally passing groups of survivors. Most of them simply gaped at him, and by the time they collected themselves, he was already too far away for them to take any action against him. However, out of fear, some of the survivors managed to pop off hurried bursts of fire in his direction. None of their shots hit him, though, as he moved too quickly for them to aim accurately. He definitely preferred traversing the city by rooftops. After he cleared out the sewers, he planned to stay away from the streets altogether. The last time, it had taken him a few hours to eliminate all the mutated life forms in the sewers. With his newly acquired combat abilities, he expected to accomplish this task more quickly. After that, he intended to climb to the roof of any nearby building and proceed with his exploration of the city, traversing it by the rooftops in search of quests or something else of interest. At some point, Jake came across the remnants of a small building resembling a diner sitting at a corner of a four-way intersection. Normally, Jake would have kept moving forward without sparing another glance at the destruction, but something caught his attention. As he approached the building, he slowed down, turning his head to observe it. A magical anomaly floated a few meters above the ruins of the diner, shimmering and distorting the surrounding air. The anomaly pulsed with eerie, unearthly light, casting strange shadows on the ground around the small structure. Jake came to a halt beside the ruined diner as memories of past encounters with magical anomalies flooded his mind. He was aware that anomalies were highly dangerous, each possessing a unique ability. Some would draw you in only to fling you away with tremendous force in a random direction, similar to the one named Pulsar that had recently propelled him off the roof. Another anomaly had the capability to break every bone in a fragile human body. There were anomalies that exploded with magical energy, dealing damage to everything within its effective range. Each anomaly was dangerous and had its own ability. They were also triggered differently. Some would activate upon contact with any object, while others ignored inanimate objects and only reacted to a living creature getting too close. Certain anomalies could be triggered by loud noises, while others remained active constantly, like the dark void that had transformed him into a Morphus. It was definitely worth carefully inspecting each anomaly to distinguish between them and understand the dangers they presented. This was why Jake decided to take a moment to study the newly discovered anomaly. He approached the ruined building, his eyes fixed on the anomaly hovering above the roof. He stopped at the shattered entrance to the small structure, taking a moment to examine the ruined interior of the diner. It was a twisted maze of broken furniture and collapsed walls. What had once been a cozy diner was now a jumble of debris and decay. Jake tilted his head back, peering at the anomaly through a gaping hole in the ceiling. The magical phenomenon emitted a constant hum, and the air inside the destroyed diner felt electrified, causing a tingling sensation to spread across his skin. He had definitely never encountered such an anomaly before, so Jake ventured into the diner to examine it more closely. Most anomalies were difficult to perceive, with some being entirely invisible and detectable only by the sounds they emitted. However, Jake's heightened senses allowed him to see and hear the anomaly hovering above the roof more clearly. Despite having hard soles like those of boots, no debris crunched beneath Jake's feet. He trod lightly, taking careful and calculated steps that made no sound at all. The only noise within the ruined diner was the hum emanating from the anomaly itself. Its shimmering form cast a strange glow over the wreckage of the interior below. The anomaly seemed to pulsate with malevolent energy, twisting and distorting the air around it in a dizzying display of power. Jake slowed, not willing to get too close to the anomaly. While he seemed to have no natural predators as a Morphus, anomalies were an entirely different matter. Some anomalies were highly dangerous, presenting a significant danger to him even in his mutant form. The air crackled with electrical energy as he took a small step closer, looking up at the anomaly through the gap in the roof. He was now directly below the magical phenomenon. The anomaly was pulsating with an eerie glow, casting shimmering light over the wrecked interior of the diner. He could hear the hum coming from the anomaly and feel the floor beneath his feet tremble as waves of force radiated from the anomaly with each pulsation. Though he hadn't summoned its stats yet, Jake had a sense that its danger level was significant. He still wasn't sure how it was triggered, though. He stood just beneath the gap in the roof, so proximity as the activation factor could be ruled out. Perhaps it responded to loud sounds or physical contact. Jake wasn't about to do something stupid like hurling objects at it or making noise to test this theory, though. After all, he knew he could learn everything he needed to know about it as soon as he called up its description. With a mental command, Jake summoned an appraisal of the anomaly, and a flood of information instantly filled his mind. Name, Electro. Description, launches lightning energy every which way when triggered. Activates when something hits it or gets within a foot of it. Duration, 10 seconds. Effective range, 30 yards. Danger level, 35 high. The anomaly was indeed extremely dangerous. Its danger level was 35, surpassing his own level by more than threefold. Another thing came to his mind. A survivor needed to scan an anomaly with their PDA to gather information about it. However, they needed to upgrade their PDA first. Each rank level of a survivor's PDA corresponded to a specific range of levels for scanning anomalies. For example, level 1 allowed scanning anomalies up to level 10, level 2 extended this to anomalies up to level 20, and so on with each subsequent level of a PDA covering an additional range of 10 levels of anomalies. To scan the electro anomaly, a survivor's PDA would need to be upgraded to at least level 3. In contrast, Jake had the ability to appraise any anomaly with just the power of his mind, regardless of its level. This unique advantage made exploration of this altered world significantly easier for Jake. His enhanced intelligence skill functioned akin to a PDA, but in some aspects, it even exceeded its capabilities. While Jake was thinking about all this, he kept staring at the anomaly through the gap in the roof, and another piece of info suddenly popped up in his mind. A challenge is available. See the details, Y/N. Jake did a double take at the anomaly floating above him. As a survivor, he'd never been offered challenges by anomalies before. He wondered why. Maybe only sentient mutants like himself could be given such opportunities? Anyway, it was an unexpected but intriguing surprise that filled him with excitement. With a thought, he requested more information. Immediately, an additional piece of info popped up in his mind. He took a moment to examine it. Speed trial, reach all the waypoints before time runs out. Time limit, 10 seconds. Waypoints, 5. Difficulty, easy. Recommended stats, Evolution Stage 1 Primordial Form, Level 10, Body 3. Reward, 10,000 MP. Accept, Y/N. When his gaze reached the recommended stats line, he paused for a second to think. It seemed that challenges like this one were designed specifically for him, distinguishing him from ordinary survivors. When his gaze reached the reward line, he felt stunned for a second, not quite believing what he was seeing. 10,000 mana points was quite a substantial reward, surpassing the amount he'd collected during his previous night's mana hunt. So yeah, the reward was remarkably generous, especially considering the speed trial was supposed to be easy. Without giving the matter more thought, Jake hastily accepted the challenge as if he were afraid the system could suddenly withdraw its offer. As soon as he accepted, a short message emerged in his mind. Challenge accepted. The speed trial will begin shortly. Jake glanced around, not sure what to expect. Nothing had changed inside the ruined diner. The anomaly remained suspended above the roof, emitting a humming sound and filling the air with electric energy. Then another notification was shown to him in his mind. Waypoints have been set. To initiate the speed trial, go to the designated starting position. Jake looked around once again and this time, caught a glimpse of some kind of glow coming in from outside through the entrance. He crossed the room and stepped out of the building. In the middle of the street, he saw a shaft of bluish light rising from the road into the sky. Had to be the starting position. Jake began to walk toward it. As soon as he got within 1 yard of it, he saw another message in his mind. Get ready. The speed trial is about to begin. Alright, let's do this, Jake thought. A countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Start. The bluish shaft of light disappeared. Tensing, Jake glanced around. Almost immediately, he spotted another beacon over 100 meters farther down the street. While the new shaft of light was far away, it was easily noticeable, extending high into the sky and towering above the surrounding buildings. Unlike the previous one, it was white instead of blue. Jake wasted no time breaking into a sprint down the street toward the waypoint. He reached the beacon in just a few seconds. Just as he ran through it, the shaft of light vanished, and a notification emerged in his mind. +10 seconds. Another shaft of white light materialized 100 yards down the street. While Jake sprinted toward it, he was deep in thought. Reaching a waypoint added 10 more seconds to the remaining time. He wondered if there was a way to track the amount of time left. As soon as he thought that, a piece of info appeared in his mind. Trial progression. Waypoints, 1/5. Remaining time, 13.72 seconds. He quickly looked over the info and dismissed it with a thought. The next shaft of light rose from the middle of a four-way intersection. Drawing closer to it, he spotted a small group of survivors crossing the intersection and heading in his direction. Judging by their behavior, it was evident the group of survivors couldn't see the shaft of light, despite the fact they were walking right past it. Obviously, the waypoints were visible only to the one undertaking the speed trial. While they were unaware of the shaft of light emerging from the center of the intersection, they couldn't help but notice the obsidian black mutant running toward them. They froze in place, mesmerized by his intimidating appearance and the incredible speed at which he was closing in on them. Before the survivors could gather their thoughts, he made it to the center of the intersection. Just before reaching the shaft of light, he slowed his pace slightly, uncertain of where the next waypoint would appear. Plus 10 seconds. This time, a beacon didn't materialize ahead of him. Instead, the next waypoint appeared on his right. Swiftly turning toward it, he accelerated his pace, keeping an eye on the group of survivors as he raced past them. Startled by his sudden movement, they instinctively recoiled, perhaps fearing he was about to attack them. However, his focus was solely on reaching the next waypoint. He had no intention of fighting them at all. Ignoring the group, he turned away from them and sprinted toward the third waypoint at full speed. Now that he was moving away from the survivors, they appeared to finally gather their composure. The sharp cracks of gunshots pierced the air as they unleashed a barrage of bullets toward him. The projectiles whizzed past him like enraged hornets, one grazing his shoulder, causing minimal harm. Although he felt no pain, the sensation was still unpleasant. He wanted to turn around and deal with the brash survivors, but he fought back the urge, knowing he had to resist his dark impulses. "It's getting away," one of the survivors yelled to the rest. "Shoot it. Kill it. Don't stop firing." However, as he distanced himself from the survivors, their shots missed him by wider margins. Watching him retreat seemed to embolden the survivors. They likely believed they'd succeeded in scaring him off. Had they known what he was capable of, they would never have dared to do anything that could piss him off and opted to run away while they could instead of provoking him. It didn't take him long to reach the third waypoint. Plus 10 seconds. The next waypoint materialized on his right again, and he turned toward it, maintaining his pace. While the previous waypoints had been roughly equidistant from each other, approximately 100 meters apart, the next waypoint lay about twice that distance away. Jake checked the trial information while he ran on. Trial progression. Waypoints, 3 out of 5. Remaining time, 21.10 seconds. It had taken less than 10 seconds to reach each of the previous waypoints, so Jake calculated he should reach the fourth waypoint before the time was up. It was a good thing there were no obstacles along his path. The weeds pushing through the cracked asphalt didn't slow him down in the slightest. The rusted car frames lined the sides of the road, but none obscured his path, allowing him to maintain his top speed. Finally, he reached the fourth waypoint situated at the center of another intersection. Plus 10 seconds. Out of the corner of his eye, Jake saw another waypoint, the last one, materialize on his right once more. Swiftly altering his course toward it, he took a second to assess the status of the trial. Trial progression. Waypoints, 4 out of 5. Remaining time, 11.36 seconds. With approximately 100 meters to cover to reach the final waypoint, Jake anticipated reaching it within 7 or 8 seconds. Confident in his ability to successfully complete the speed trial, he continued his sprint. As he drew nearer the final waypoint, a realization struck him: he'd completed a full circle and was now back at the diner where the trial had commenced. Notably, the last waypoint shared the same blue hue as the initial starting point. When he ran through the shaft of bluish light, a notification emerged in his mind. Trial complete. You have received 10,000 MP. Only then did Jake slow down, eventually coming to a stop. He felt excited. Although the speed trial hadn't posed a significant challenge, the reward was pretty amazing. He could now afford to unlock a few more skills from the genetic development interface. However, he decided it could wait for now, because he wanted to check something else first. He turned back toward the diner and entered through the doorway. Upon stepping inside, he heard the familiar hum and felt the floor tremble beneath the soles of his feet. So even before he saw the electro anomaly through the hole in the roof, he already knew it was still there. Which meant that completing a challenge didn't neutralize an anomaly. Positioning himself directly beneath the hole in the ceiling, Jake peered through it at the electro anomaly. He retrieved its description with a mental command, and the information materialized in his mind. No info on the speed trial appeared, though. He waited a bit longer, thinking there could be a possibility of a time delay in the system's response. However, nothing happened. After making sure the anomaly had no other challenges to offer, Jake stepped away from the hole in the roof, deep in thought. So once a challenge associated with an anomaly was completed, it ceased to exist. It couldn't be repeated, and no new one replaced it. However, Jake decided to revisit the diner tomorrow to see if the speed trial would resurface or if another challenge would replace it after the world underwent its regular system reset. After leaving the dinner, Jake stood on the sidewalk for a moment, still thinking. His initial plan was to collect mana at night and venture into the sewers to gather XP during the daytime. However, having just completed the speed trial and discovering the existence of challenges linked to anomalies, Jake decided to postpone his sewer exploration for now. He didn't know whether challenges were linked to all anomalies or only certain ones. Though he suspected the latter, he didn't know for sure yet. Anyway, driven by the prospect of finding more challenges to complete, he set out to locate another anomaly. For the next several hours, Jake scoured the city in search of anomalies. The rarity of anomalies, which had previously brought him joy as a survivor because of their mortal danger and challenging nature to detect, now left him feeling frustrated. Moreover, it became apparent that anomalies that had challenges linked to them were really rare. After the completion of the speed trial, he dedicated several hours to a fruitless search without encountering another similar anomaly. It was becoming increasingly frustrating for him. Despite investing considerable time, his efforts yielded no results. At least, he now knew that the anomalies with challenges linked to them were pretty scarce. He was on the verge of giving up his search and moving on to explore the sewers instead when he finally discovered what he was looking for. The anomaly he stumbled upon was a pulsar, the same one that had propelled him off a roof the other day. Despite being at street level now, he was reluctant to risk being sucked into the pulsar and forcefully ejected in an unpredictable direction, so he maintained a safe distance. The anomaly floated above the floor in the lobby of a high-rise building, situated at the center of the vast room. Jake maintained a safe distance of about 15 yards from the anomaly, yet even from this far, he could sense the gravitational pull of the pulsar. He was acutely aware that if he inched closer to the anomaly, the gravitational pull would escalate in strength. He knew very well that once he reached a certain threshold, the force would become so powerful it would irresistibly suck him in, rendering him powerless to prevent being pulled into its grasp. That was why Jake remained at a safe distance from the anomaly, unwilling to take a single step closer. While he understood that the anomaly posed no lethal threat, he was unwilling to endure the unsettling experience once more. With a simple mental command, he summoned the description of the pulsar. The information he already knew emerged in his mind. He didn't bother to reread it. Anticipating the anomaly to offer no challenge, akin to the previous encounters he'd faced in the past several hours, Jake started to turn around to leave the building. And then, with a slight delay, a new piece of information abruptly emerged in his thoughts. A challenge is available. See the details, Y/N. A surge of excitement swept through Jake as he realized he'd finally stumbled upon an anomaly that had a challenge linked to it. He immediately requested to view the details, and a fresh piece of information promptly appeared in his mind. Tower climb, reach the roof of a high-rise building to eliminate an elite mutant. Time limit, 6 hours. Floors, 10. Difficulty, hard. Recommended stats, Evolution Stage 1 Primordial Form, Level 15, Body 5. Main reward, finish all floors and defeat an elite mutant on the roof to unlock the boost menu. Intermediate reward, finish a minimum of 7 floors to upgrade any skill to rank 2, bypassing its current progress or requirements. Accept, Y/N. Jake carefully reviewed the details of the tower climb challenge that had just surfaced in his mind. The current challenge differed significantly from the previous speed trial and required a different skill set altogether. The tower climb presented a more challenging difficulty level as well, marked as hard, in stark contrast to the previous speed trial, which had been relatively easy. Not meeting the recommended stats with his level 10 and body 3, he couldn't help but wonder if he was up to the task. Despite his reservations, Jake wasn't willing to miss out on the chance to unlock a new feature. Challenge accepted. To initiate the tower climb, reach the designated area. Stepping outside the building, Jake scanned his surroundings, anticipating a beacon to guide him toward the tower climb's starting point. However, to his surprise, no shafts of light akin to the ones from the speed trial materialized in the distance. Perplexed, he pondered whether scaling the high-rise roof might offer a better vantage point. On the other hand, the waypoints from the speed trial had been so high they had towered prominently above the surrounding high-rise buildings, making it easy to spot them even from the street level. So he decided against climbing a high-rise roof in search of waypoints, reasoning that those distinctive markers were likely specific to the speed trial challenge anyway. Puzzled, Jake continued to look around, wondering how he was supposed to know where to go without any apparent guidance. In the end, he decided to simply ask. "System, tell me where I need to go," he thought. As soon as Jake asked the question in his mind, a shimmering line materialized before him. It stretched out ahead, before curving to the right after reaching the midpoint of the street. It moved ahead until it reached a four-way intersection where it veered to the left. A few seconds later, the sparkling line vanished. Jake transitioned into a brisk jog along the street. When he reached the intersection where the line had turned left, he halted. With a thought, he summoned the line once more, and it promptly materialized before him. It extended a couple of blocks forward before making another turn. Jake chose to pursue the line without delay this time, maintaining his pace as he followed the guiding line. When it vanished, he promptly summoned it once more, without slowing his pace. Jake followed the sparkling path for some time, taking different turns at intersections until he finally reached his destination. He came to a halt before a tall building in which the sparkling line had just guided before disappearing. He studied the tall structure for a moment. The 10-story building appeared identical to the surrounding structures, lacking any unique features. Not sure what to expect, he extended a blade from his left wrist and morphed his right fingers into claws before entering the building through the shattered entrance door. Pausing in the opening, Jake surveyed the vast and desolate lobby before him. The space was empty save for occasional piles of rubble strewn about. Jake's eyes quickly identified several replication pods suspended from the ceiling, positioned low to the floor. He also spotted a bunch of walkers shuffling aimlessly about the area. As he ventured further into the lobby, a notification materialized in his mind. The tower climb has been initiated. Good luck. Remaining time, 5 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. Apart from the message that appeared in his mind, there were no visible changes in the surroundings to suggest that the challenge had just commenced for Jake. Alright, let's do this, he thought before launching himself at the nearest group of ex-humans. Jake swiped his blade at the nearest walker, opening up its stomach. The mutant took a couple of steps forward before collapsing to the ground, dead. Even before it tumbled down, Jake had already engaged 2 more walkers that had just reached him. He slashed his claws across one mutant's throat and stabbed the other through the chest. Both were dead within seconds. His sense of hearing picked up a disgusting wet sound as one of the nearest replication pods blossomed open like a flower, causing the transparent liquid within to splash outward. From the pod emerged a fully developed mutant, this one a leaper breed. It bent its knees and launched itself toward him, propelling its body through the air. Jake sidestepped, swinging his sword, catching the leaper in midair. The tip of his blade dug into the creature's flesh, gouging a long gash along its body. It fell to the floor, but before it could get up, Jake stomped on its head, smashing it apart like an overripe melon. In his expanded field of vision, he spotted another mutant lurching at him. Jake easily dodged the swipe of its claws and immediately countered, swinging its blade upwards, slashing the creature from its crotch to the edge of its sternum. The coils of steaming intestines fell out of the mutant's torn midsection. The creature's legs tangled in the massive guts dangling from the vertical gash in its belly, causing the mutant to stumble. It tumbled forward, collapsing to the ground face first, and Jake finished it off with a stab through the back of its neck, severing its spinal cord. The remaining mutants came at him from different directions. A few other replication pods opened up to let fully developed creatures step out. The life-giving liquid splashed outward, coating the floor and making it slippery. One of the walkers lost his foothold and crashed to the wet floor just before Jake. He stabbed it through the back of its head, his blade breaking through its skull without much trouble. He then jumped to the side so as not to let the mutants surround him. As he passed one of them, he swung his blade, cutting through the flesh of its neck, nearly detaching the creature's head from its body. This battle was no different from countless others he'd participated in as a Morphus. He easily dodged enemy attacks and countered with his own, using his claws for slashing and his blade for stabbing. Even though he was greatly outnumbered, the low-level mutants posed no threat to him at all. He killed one ex-human after another until there were no more left. After all the creatures were dealt with, Jake turned his attention to the replication pods. Each of them had released at least one mutant during the recent battle, and now the pods were in the process of creating fresh specimens. Each contained a creature in the early stages of development. Jake took a step toward one of the pods and slashed at it with his blade and claws, tearing it to shreds. The shredded pieces of the torn pod dropped to the floor as the pod's liquid splattered every which way. The underdeveloped mutant fell to the floor with a wet thud. Jake stomped on the embryo of the creature, turning it into a formless pulpy mass. After that, Jake proceeded to deal with the remaining replication pods. Once he was done, a notification popped up in his mind. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 550 XP. Then another system message emerged in his head. Floor 1 cleared. You can now proceed to the next one. A sparkling line similar to the one that had led him here materialized in front of him. It stretched diagonally across the lobby before leading into one of the corridors. Jake followed it. The shimmering path turned at a junction to lead into an empty elevator shaft just before disappearing. Jake came to a stop at the entrance of the empty shaft, gazing down at the pile of debris below. The rubble consisted mainly of shattered concrete and twisted rebar, leaving him puzzled because he didn't understand why the guiding line had led him to this particular spot. There was nothing of use there. Suddenly, wisps of bluish energy emerged from the depths of the shaft, causing fragments of concrete to float upward right before his eyes. Animated by magical energy, the concrete shards started to converge, drawing closer to one another. While the magic was at work, Jake was enveloped by a reverberating hum emanating from all directions. A tingling sensation coursed through his skin as if the very air within the elevator shaft had just become electrified. The pieces of concrete continued to drift together, connecting with each other, forming a makeshift platform that appeared precarious and unstable. Composed of various concrete chunks fused together, the platform was adorned with a labyrinth of cracks. Jake was sure the platform would crumble back into a heap of individual concrete pieces if he dared to set foot upon it. After a few more moments, the transformation process was complete. As Jake had anticipated, the resulting platform appeared utterly precarious. Did the system really expect him to stand on it? In the next instant, a sudden flash of light momentarily blinded Jake. As his vision cleared, he saw the platform now looked very different from a second before. It now appeared seamless and intact, no longer resembling a collection of separate concrete pieces fused together. Additionally, Jake noticed 4 enigmatic symbols etched into the corners of the platform, each emitting a subtle, ethereal glow. Jake believed that now the platform was stable and secure enough for him to step onto without any risk of it breaking or collapsing. But before doing so, he decided to check the status of the challenge. He summoned it with a thought. Tower climb progression. Floors, 1 out of 10. Remaining time, 5 hours, 52 minutes, 31 seconds. It had taken him less than 10 minutes to eliminate all the mutated life forms on the first floor. However, he had a feeling the difficulty of the challenge would increase exponentially with each subsequent floor. With that in mind, he entered the elevator shaft. As he stood on the platform, the 4 sigils at the corners glowed even brighter with bluish energy, and the platform began to ascend to the next floor. The platform moved up smoothly and easily, ascending at a comfortable pace. Jake observed its dimensions, noting its smaller size compared to the expansive shaft. The platform wasn't connected to anything, being powered solely by magic. Jake tipped his head back to gaze at the long dark shaft above. It extended to the highest floor, but he doubted the platform would take him to the very top in one go. It would most likely make intermittent stops on each successive floor along its ascent. Just as he expected, the platform ascended to the second floor and came to a halt. The 4 runes etched into the corners dimmed without completely fading away, casting ethereal light in the dimly lit surroundings of the shaft. The elevator door was missing, leaving behind a gaping opening. He stepped through it into a corridor, immediately tensing and getting ready to fight. He jerked his head one way, then another, but there were no enemies in sight. Each end of the corridor stretched out before him, devoid of any threats. No sound reached his ears from anywhere. The complete silence that enveloped him was eerie. Jake briefly glanced over his shoulder. The platform remained at the same level, each of the runes emitting a faint bluish glow. The platform would likely stay at the same spot, waiting for him to eliminate all the threats on the floor before transporting him to the subsequent one. Only where were the mutants he had to kill? Jake looked around once again. Picking a random direction, he began to sneak along the corridor, moving silently and gracefully like the predator he was. As he advanced a few more steps into the corridor, his acute sense of hearing caught a low hum. It seemed to come from all around him at once. The air suddenly felt electrified as well. Jake froze in his tracks, unsure of what was going on and what to expect. He quickly surveyed his surroundings and noticed a strange occurrence on the wall to his right. A sudden burst of eerie light revealed a vertical tear forming, which turned out to be a magical portal. As the opening widened, clawed hands emerged, followed by the face of an ex-human walker with a menacing grin full of jagged teeth. As the magical tear expanded even more, the mutant emerged fully from the portal and charged directly toward him across the width of the corridor. Jake lurched toward the enemy. He swiped its extended hands aside, stabbing the creature's chest with his sword all the way through. The blade erupted through the back of the monster, splattering the wall behind it with dark blood. He yanked the sword out of the mutant's body, and it collapsed to the floor, dead. In his expansive field of vision, Jake spotted numerous mystical rifts unfurling along the walls on both sides of him. More portals appeared on the floor, and mutants were already emerging from within them as well. A sudden movement above caught his eye, and as he gazed upward, he saw another gateway tearing through the ceiling. A mutant's form momentarily projected from the opening before plummeting to the ground with a heavy thud. The creature rose to its feet and turned toward him, its gaping maw exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth as it emitted a piercing shriek. Despite its menacing display, it was merely a standard walker. A message emerged in his mind. Wave 1 has started. Targets killed, 1 out of 15. All the mutants that emerged from the portals immediately dashed toward Jake from all directions. All of them were low-level walkers, though, presenting no real challenge to him. It took him just a few minutes to deal with them all. Each of the portals had disappeared in a few seconds after disgorging a monster. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 150 XP. Wave 1 complete. Wave 2 will initiate in 59 seconds. This was definitely very different from what he'd experienced on the first floor. Jake wondered how many waves of enemies he would need to fight off. Utilizing the respite, he took a moment to review his current experience level. XP, 720/1375. He was halfway to earning a level up, having accumulated 550 XP on the first floor and 150 XP on the second. With the second floor not yet completed, there was a chance he could level up before finishing it. It wasn't long before portals once again began to materialize all around him on the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling. Most of the enemies were walkers, but among them, he also noticed a couple of leapers. Wave 2 has started. Targets killed, 0 out of 25. Jake slashed and pierced, hacked and stabbed, killing mutants one after another while easily dodging their attacks. As soon as he took care of the fresh bunch of monsters, yet another wave was announced. For the next several minutes, Jake fought off one group after another, easily dispatching the fresh mutants the system hurled his way. Refusing to stay in the same spot, Jake was in constant motion, navigating through the corridors and rooms of the second floor. Upon discovering a large, vacant room that appeared to have been a conference room in the past, he noted its ample space for maneuvering. Recognizing the tactical advantage it offered, Jake chose to make his stand within that room. The final, third, wave consisted of 30 mutants, mostly walkers and a couple of leapers. It proved to be the most difficult compared to the previous ones. The reason for that was a shambler that emerged from one of the portals. Not that Jake had much trouble with the last wave. Since the shambler was pretty slow, he first dealt with all the faster walkers and leapers, before giving his full attention to the huge mutant. When its bulky body bleeding from numerous wounds Jake had inflicted on it collapsed to the floor, a final message emerged in his mind. Floor 2 cleared. You can now proceed to the next one. Contrary to his expectation, he hadn't leveled up yet, which surprised him. When he checked his XP, he saw he was almost there, though. XP, 1365/1375. He literally needed just one lousy walker to level up to 11. He then checked the current status of the challenge. Tower climb progression. Floors, 2 out of 10. Remaining time, 5 hours, 21 minutes, 15 seconds. It had taken him half an hour to complete floor 2 in the tower climb challenge, a considerably longer amount of time compared to the shift completion of the first floor. It meant that the challenge had only just started in earnest, and the difficulty would only increase with each subsequent floor, just as he'd expected. Jake made his way back to the platform in the elevator shaft. As he stepped onto it, the 4 sigils glowed brighter, signaling its activation for the ascent to the next floor. With Jake's weight fully on the platform, it automatically initiated its ascent to the next level. Jake cleared several more floors. The difficulty significantly increased with each one, which resulted in him taking more time to get to the next floor. The 6th level proved to be the most challenging so far. Not only was it hurling one wave of walkers and leapers his way after another, but it also constantly spawned tougher types of enemies such as shamblers and whippers. Jake exerted all his strength and agility, fighting off one wave after another, giving it his all. This level alone depleted nearly as much mana as his body typically consumed in a day. The last wave of monsters was finally taken care of and the 6th floor was finally cleared. Yet instead of making his way to the platform to advance to the next level, he sank into a crouching position. Feeling mentally drained, he decided to rest for a moment. As long as he had more than 1000 MP stored within his body, his magically enhanced mutant body couldn't get physically tired. However, mentally Jake felt exhausted. He'd had to do his utmost to defeat the monsters on the 6th floor, resulting in his mental fatigue afterward. After such a prolonged and intense battle, he needed to rest for a few minutes. While he rested, he checked the status of the challenge. Tower climb progression. Floors, 6 out of 10. Remaining time, 2 hours, 48 minutes, 29 seconds. It had been over 3 hours since he had started the tower climb. Half the time of the challenge had already passed, but he still needed to clear 4 more floors, and each of them was going to be increasingly more difficult than the previous one. Jake was starting to wonder if he would be able to complete the challenge before time was up. During the battle on one of the previous floors, Jake had leveled up to 11, but he hadn't allocated the skill point yet. He decided to do it now. After giving the matter some thought, he opted to get an upgrade for swords. With a mental command, he summoned the upgrade menu for the ability. Swords, rank I, 12%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. Upgrade options, common. 1. Strengthen swords to cut through dense muscle, bone, and other resilient organic materials with ease. Cost, 1 SP. 2. Extend swords by a few inches for increased reach. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Significantly reduce the time needed for extending swords. Cost, 1 SP. The upgrade options were similar to those of the claw's ability. Jake decided to spend the skill point to acquire strengthened swords. There was no time to lose, so he chose not to review his stats for now. Instead, he forced himself to rise from the floor and make his way to the platform, mentally preparing for another trying fight with mutants. When the platform took him to the next, 7th floor, he stepped out of the elevator shaft, body coiled, ready to spring into action. Magical rift gates started to materialize all around him on the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The first enemies to emerge from the portals were walkers and leapers. From deeper parts of the 7th floor came the roar of either a shambler or a whipper. Jake had been dealing with ex-humans for so long, he could now differentiate between them by the sounds they made alone. Suddenly, from somewhere behind him, came a strange shriek he had never heard before. Ignoring several walkers approaching him from the front, he glanced over his shoulder. He saw a new type of mutant that had just emerged from one of the portals farther down the corridor. The creature was tall and lanky. It was dressed in tattered clothing, which revealed more flesh than it concealed. Sinewy lean muscles peeked through the tears in the ragged clothes the mutant wore. While the creature's muscles weren't bulging out all that much, it was clear the mutant was both strong and agile. The most notable feature of the mutant was its hands. Or more accurately, the absence of those. Where the hands should have been were long bony extensions. They were pointed, double-edged, and slightly curved, making them perfect for slashing. With a thought, Jake called up the description of the mutant. Ex-human slasher, level 15, elite. Special ability, flurry of swings, the mutant enters a frenzy state, swinging its blades violently for a few seconds. So it was an elite enemy. Elite mutants were more dangerous than the regular ones, and they possessed special abilities as well. Jake had already encountered an elite ex-human mutant with a similar ability when he was doing a hunt quest. However, the creature he had to track down and eliminate at that time was a walker armed with claws. The slasher behind him had what looked like bony extensions, which were basically blades, so dealing with this kind of monster was going to pose a different kind of challenge to him. The first two walkers reached Jake, prompting him to shift his focus back to the imminent threat in front of him. One of them attacked, but he easily evaded the swipe of claws aimed at his face. He swung his sword in an arc with lightning speed, the blade cutting through the flesh and bone in the monster's neck like a hot knife through butter, sending the severed head flying to the side. He was amazed at how easily his upgraded blade cut through the mutant's body. Swords had definitely become much more powerful after he acquired strengthened swords a few minutes ago, proving this upgrade was totally worth the skill point he'd spent on it. Another walker lurched at him, ending his line of thought. Jake danced to the side, effortlessly dodging its attack right before thrusting his sword into the mutant's chest. His blade sliced through its body, easily cutting through the flesh and shattering all the ribs that were in its way. The mutant's body went limp, and the dying walker leaned against him, its arms dropping to dangle lifelessly at its sides. In the corner of his wide vision, he spotted yet another walker approaching him from the side. Having no time to yank his sword free from the mutant's body, he shot his right hand toward the new threat, his iron-like claws digging deep into the flesh of its throat. He tore the creature's larynx out, causing a torrent of dark blood to pour from the nasty wound. For a second, the mutant stared at Jake in confusion, as if not quite comprehending what had just occurred. Then the mutant began to fall, and Jake immediately stepped aside, yanking the blade from the first walker, whose body was still leaning against him. Both ex-humans collapsed to the floor at the same time, their bodies twitching in death throes. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 30 XP. A terrifying shriek reverberated from behind, prompting Jake to wheel around and catch sight of the slasher charging down the corridor toward him. Jake only had a brief moment to brace himself for the imminent encounter with this new type of elite mutant. The slasher launched a ferocious assault on him, unleashing its special ability right away. Its bone appendages swung violently toward him, compelling him to go on the defensive. Jake raised his sword, deflecting one of the creature's blades, then swiftly ducked as the mutant immediately swung the other one at him. Unfazed by missing its target, the slasher persisted in its aggressive onslaught, forcing Jake to retreat. He swiftly swung his sword upward, meeting one of the bone blades with a dull clang, successfully blocking the mutant's strike. The slasher advanced, bringing the other blade down in a sweeping motion. Reacting on instinct, Jake raised his claws in a last-ditch effort to intercept the blade. He was confident that his iron-like talons would be able to withstand the attack. To his astonishment, the blade sliced through two of his talons, severing them, and continued its downward trajectory, hacking deep into his shoulder. His sensory receptors signaled that he had sustained significant damage in that area of his body. He felt no pain whatsoever, though. The little and ring finger talons on his right hand dropped to the floor, but Jake had no time to dwell on the possible consequences of the injury. He had to solely focus on dealing with the slasher, otherwise the next thing to be chopped off might easily be his head. Deflecting the slasher's onslaught with just one sword was challenging, especially since his claws proved to be ineffective for defense. Realizing this, Jake mentally instructed a blade to extend from his right wrist. While the transformation from fingers to claws was nearly instantaneous, thanks to an upgrade he had acquired some time ago, extending a blade from his wrist was a much slower process. While the blade was in the process of extending from his right wrist, he continued to defend himself against the slasher's relentless attacks. He blocked some of its strikes with his left blade and dodged others while retreating down the corridor as the mutant continued its relentless onslaught. Reflecting on his past encounter during the hunt quest, Jake remembered facing an elite walker with a lightning-fast ability similar to the slasher's, which had forced him into a defensive stance. This time, however, he had the advantage of sharpened reflexes, an upgrade for enhanced agility that he had recently obtained. This upgrade improved his reactions in combat, allowing him to execute agile dodges, quick maneuvers, and swift counterattacks. With sharpened reflexes, he found it much easier to evade the slasher's attacks compared to how challenging it would have been without it. Finally, the blade fully extended from his right wrist, letting him tackle the slasher in full force now. Despite the elite mutant's relentless assault with its sharp appendages, he effectively blocked each attack with the two swords of his own. When the slasher's special ability, Flurry of Swings, finally wore off, the mutant's movement slowed down. Immediately seizing the opportunity, he shifted from the defensive to the offensive. Jake quickly delivered a powerful swing with his right sword toward the mutant. Despite the mutant's attempt to block the strike with one of its blades, its slowed movements, due to the expiration of its special ability, left it vulnerable and unable to counter effectively. His blade sliced through muscle and bone with ease, severing the mutant's arm at the elbow. The lower arm with the bone blade extending from it dropped to the floor, leaving the mutant with only one blade in its possession. The vile creature briefly glanced at the stump of its arm but showed little reaction to the unfortunate turn of events. The slasher's evil eyes fixed on him once more, but before the mutant could do anything, Jake swiftly swung both blades in a scissoring motion toward the sides of its neck, beheading the mutant. Enemy killed. Plus 250 XP. Defeating the slasher had yielded a significant amount of experience points for a single enemy. But before he could savor his small victory, a familiar piercing shriek echoed from behind him, accompanied by two others. Whirling around, Jake saw three more slashers emerging from newly materialized magical rifts. Fuck. Two of them immediately employed their special abilities, launching vicious attacks from different angles. It didn't take long for the third slasher to join the fray. He evaded and blocked their assaults, using all of his agility and speed to defend himself. Once more, he was grateful for having acquired sharpened reflexes. Without this upgrade, the three slashers would likely have cut him into pieces by now. At some point, Jake activated his bladed tentacle ability, feeling a long appendage sprouting from his shoulder blade. Focused on deflecting enemy strikes with both his swords, he was unable to use them for offense at that moment. Luckily, he had more than one type of weapon at his disposal. The tentacle took 2 seconds to fully grow, which seemed like an eternity in the midst of the fierce battle. Once the tentacle was fully developed, Jake took control of the appendage, sending it zipping through the air toward one of the slashers attacking him. The blade at the tip of the tentacle stabbed the mutant right into an eye, turning it into a pulp. The mutant froze for a moment as if taken aback by such a turn of events. Jake used the moment of its confusion to thrust one of his swords into the mutant through its chest, shattering several ribs in the process. The bladed tentacle detached from his body, but Jake immediately grew another one, using up a certain amount of mana for the action. Obeying his mental commands, the long appendage streaked through the air with lightning speed, slicing through the throat of another slasher, killing it in mere seconds. Bladed Tentacle was undeniably an impressive and deadly ability. Jake made a mental note to obtain some upgrades for it in the future, such as reducing the time needed to form a tentacle and growing numerous tentacles at the same time. With the first two slashers dealt with, dispatching the third was relatively easy. However, the battle was far from over. New ex-humans continued to emerge from portals, ready to join the fray. In contrast to the superior slashers, the other known types of ex-humans were significantly weaker. Jake took on multiple walkers at once, eliminating one group of them only to confront the next one without delay. After what felt like an eternity, the battle on Floor 7 came to an end. When Jake checked the status of the challenge, he saw the battle had lasted about 50 minutes. With less than 2 hours left to clear the remaining 3 floors and defeat the boss on the rooftop, Jake began to seriously doubt his ability to complete the challenge within the remaining time frame. This challenge was designed for users with levels ranging from 10 to 15. Since he had been at level 10 at that time, he had barely met the minimum requirement, explaining why the challenge felt overly difficult for him. It would have been better for him to increase his level before attempting the challenge. On the other hand, leveling up more than once a day was difficult, so it would have taken him several days to level up a few times. Jake couldn't have afforded to spend multiple days leveling up, because the challenge would probably have disappeared the following day due to the system resetting the world at the start of each new day. In any case, if Jake wished to finish the tower climb challenge on time, he really needed to find a solution promptly. The lifeless bodies of the ex-human mutants he had slain lay scattered across the floor. Jake stood in the same spot for a moment, lost in thought. It had taken him around 50 minutes to finish the 7th floor of the tower climb challenge. Now he had to conquer 3 more floors, with each subsequent floor getting more difficult than the last, and then defeat a boss on the rooftop. Considering the time spent on the last floor, it seemed unlikely that he could clear 3 more floors and defeat the boss in under 2 hours. He needed to come up with a plan, and he needed to do so real fast. A sudden idea crossed his mind. What if he attempted to skip floors 8, 9, and 10 altogether? Perhaps he could climb to the roof of a neighboring building and leap across the gap to reach the rooftop of this structure. After all, the ultimate objective of this challenge was to ascend to the top of the tower and confront the mutant boss. Whether the system would allow such a blatant cheat was anyone's guess. Jake had serious doubts about the success of this plan. The portals from which mutants emerged only appeared when he advanced to a new floor, and he was certain the same rule applied to the boss. If he attempted to bypass the intermediate floors and head directly to the rooftop, the boss might not even materialize. Although Jake was fairly confident that this was a likely scenario, he couldn't be certain. With no better alternatives in mind, it seemed worth attempting, even if he believed it would likely end in failure. As he started crossing the room he was in, the sharp crack of gunshots echoed from the street, causing Jake to freeze for a second. The gunfire continued unabated from the outside. At that moment, a new idea sparked in his mind. Jake spun around and jogged toward one of the immense floor-to-ceiling windows that ran along the front wall facing the street. The glass was long gone, allowing the wind to gust into the room. He halted at the edge of one of the shattered windows, staring down at the street below. He saw a group of survivors in the middle of the street, discharging their weapons at a gathering of ex-humans, both walkers and leapers, converging upon them from various alleyways and buildings on both sides of the street. The survivors were armed with an assortment of weapons, mostly shotguns and assault rifles. The cacophony of gunfire reverberated through the area, drawing more mutants to the scene. For a moment, it appeared as if the group was on the brink of being overrun by the ex-humans, facing the grim fate of being torn to shreds. However, as it turned out, they were quite competent, standing back to back and firing in multiple directions, effectively covering all angles at once. The barrage of bullets unleashed by the survivors shredded the mutants to pieces long before the vile creatures could close in on them. Within moments, the fight came to a swift end. The ground was littered with the remnants of the fallen mutants they had just slain. The survivors remained vigilant, keeping their weapons trained in different directions for a few more seconds, ready to repel any additional enemies that might appear. The team demonstrated proficiency in handling ex-humans, even though the mutants they faced were low-level walkers and leapers. The survivors displayed remarkable organization and coordination. Jake contemplated luring them into the building and tricking them into fighting alongside him, knowing that their experience and cooperation would significantly improve his chances of completing the challenge in time. He was unsure of how to lure the survivors in or whether his plan would even succeed, but he believed it was a risk worth taking. The alternative of bypassing the remaining 3 floors to reach the rooftop, only to find the boss missing, seemed like a far riskier choice. His new plan was indeed a more favorable option. No more mutants showed up, and the group of survivors down in the street finally relaxed. They lowered their guns and began to check the dead bodies for loot. With no time to lose, Jake spun around and crossed the room toward the exit. He made it back to the platform and paused for a second, thinking. He knew for certain that once he stepped onto the platform, it would take him 1 level up. There was no way to manually operate the platform. It functioned automatically, only moving him up by 1 level and refusing to ascend further until he completed the current floor. Not being able to use the platform to go down was not a problem for him, as he had other options available to descend. However, Jake couldn't help but ponder what would occur when he descended all the way down to the first floor. Would the platform descend with him, or would it stay in its current position? If the platform remained stationary, his plan would fail, before even starting. With all the staircases destroyed, the survivors would simply have no means to ascend to the upper floors of the building. Jake made it to a staircase. Or, more accurately, what used to be a staircase, as most of the steps were missing, making it look like an empty shaft. The door was long gone as well. Jake paused in the opening, peering down the shaft that descended all the way to the first floor. Here and there, pieces of rebar protruded from the walls, providing decent handholds. If he had been human, he would never have dared to attempt to descend the shaft. Being an agile mutant, he was confident he could accomplish it. He still had swords extended from his wrists. Giving a mental command, he instructed them to retract. It took a couple of seconds for them to morph back into his flesh. He also transformed his claws back into normal-looking hands. Noticing he had only 3 fingers on his right hand, he pondered whether he would ever be able to grow the 2 missing fingers that the very first slasher he encountered had cut off. He hoped so. He recalled seeing enhanced regeneration in the genetic development interface. However, at that particular moment, Jake couldn't spare any time to summon the skill store and read the skill's description. He also glanced at the deep cut in his shoulder that the first slasher had inflicted on him. The wound had been severe, causing him to leak some of his mana. After the battle had ended, he remained inactive for a while, allowing his body to focus entirely on healing itself. By that point, the cut had nearly closed, and his mana was no longer leaking. Jake refocused on the shaft before him, taking note of the positioning of a few nearby pieces of rebar protruding from the walls. He calculated the best way to descend in his mind and then jumped down without hesitation. Jake dropped a few feet before grabbing hold of a piece of rebar sticking out from the nearest wall, preventing his fall. Hanging on with one hand, he took a moment to steady himself. He then swiftly scanned his surroundings and noticed another sturdy handhold, slightly lower than his current position, protruding from the opposite wall. Positioning the soles of his feet against the wall, he carefully adjusted his body angle before pushing off against the wall, releasing his grip on the piece of rebar. He easily twisted his body in midair, rotating to face the direction of his movement. Just before impact with the opposite wall, he braced himself, hitting it with the soles of his feet and bending his knees to absorb the shock. Reacting swiftly, he reached out and grabbed hold of another piece of rebar jutting out from the wall to halt his descent down the shaft. After that, Jake glanced over his shoulder and noticed that he was now positioned at the same level as the entrance to the 6th floor. The door was absent, and the section of the wall surrounding it had been partly destroyed, creating a large gaping hole in its place. His plan was to reach the 6th floor to determine if the magical platform would descend with him. If it did not, there would be no point in wasting time descending all the way to the 1st floor. Jake adjusted his body toward the entrance, then propelled himself off the wall, soaring across the expanse of the shaft and through the entrance to the 6th floor. Upon landing, he bent his knees to soften the landing. He then broke into a run down the corridor leading toward the elevator shaft housing the magical platform. As he sprinted, he listened carefully, focusing on any sounds around him, but no more gunshots could be heard coming from the street. The group of survivors had likely already looted the mutants they'd killed and continued traveling to whatever destination they had been headed to prior to being ambushed. Jake knew he had to hasten his pace if he wanted to intercept them before they slipped away. When he made it to the elevator shaft, he saw the platform positioned at the same level as the 6th floor, indicating that it had indeed descended along with him by one level. It was great. It meant that once he reached the 1st floor, the platform would lower all the way down as well, providing him with the means to transport the group of survivors to the intended floor. Figuring out how he would lure them inside the building and then herd them all into the elevator shaft posed an altogether different challenge to tackle. He would also have to follow them into the elevator shaft, as he had a hunch that the enchanted platform wouldn't descend until he joined them on it. How the survivors would react to having a monster like him in such close proximity was hard to predict. Jake had no idea how to do all that or whether it would ultimately work out. He would have to come up with a plan on the fly and simply watch how things played out. After returning to the empty shaft, he continued his descent. He dropped down the shaft, progressing one level at a time, gripping pieces of rebar sticking out from the walls and any other available handholds. When there were none directly below him, he pushed off from his current wall to leap to another one that offered a secure grip. The descent proceeded easily and smoothly. While he was aware that falling even from the top floor to the bottom wouldn't be fatal, he knew he would get hurt, which he aimed to avoid at all costs. To conquer the final 3 floors and defeat the boss, he needed to be in good condition. So he proceeded with his careful yet brisk descent, leaping from wall to wall and grasping onto handholds as he went. Even after being amorphous for some time now, Jake still marveled at his agility and swiftness. He effortlessly controlled his body, adjusting midair with ease and smoothly seizing handholds. At last, he arrived at the base of the shaft. He got out and sprinted through a brief corridor that opened up into the main area of the 1st floor. Racing across the vast room, he burst out of the building. Pausing momentarily, he took a second to survey his surroundings, noticing the corpses of the mutants slain by the group of survivors just a few minutes earlier. Regarding the survivors themselves, he spotted them half a block away from the building, strolling down the street. They hadn't gotten all that far, so his worry about them getting away had been unfounded. However, the most challenging part was yet to come. Jake slipped into a swift but almost silent pursuit of the survivors. He moved with stealthy grace, treading cautiously and silently like a seasoned predator on the hunt. While he had his eyes fixed on the survivors ahead of him, he paid attention to his surroundings, his senses finely attuned to the slightest of movements or possible signs of danger around him. Within moments, he narrowed the gap between the survivors to a mere 15 yards. Surprisingly, they were none the wiser. He was usually pleased with how silently he moved, but right now, it worked against him. Jake needed to attract the survivors' attention, but he also knew that getting too close to them would be risky. If he were to sneak up on them suddenly from behind, the only outcome would be to spook them, causing them to potentially open fire on him before he had a chance to communicate. No, he needed to make them aware of his presence, without being too overt and drastic about it. Slowing down, Jake glanced around and spotted the rusty car frame off to his right. An idea sparked in his mind, prompting him to swerve toward the old vehicle. As he closed the distance to within a few yards, he leaped forward, propelling his body up onto the roof of the dilapidated car. The rusty metal roof, showing signs of heavy damage, sagged slightly beneath his weight but held firm, emitting a loud, creaking sound. Jake crouched down, his palms resting on the rusty metal of the car roof, his gaze fixed on the group of survivors farther down the street. Just as he expected, they heard the creaking noise from behind them. They hesitated for a fraction of a second before quickly pivoting to face his direction. "What the hell is that?" Jake heard one of the survivors exclaim before they all simultaneously aimed their guns at him as if on cue. Jake remained completely still, acutely aware of the gun barrels aimed directly at him. His enhanced vision enabled him to see the index fingers tightly wrapped around the triggers, just a slight amount of pressure away from unleashing a barrage of shots. Despite the tense situation, he willed himself to remain still and non-threatening, crouching atop the roof of the rusted, dilapidated vehicle. He made sure not to make even the slightest of movements. He needed the survivors to keep their heads. If they got spooked and opened fire on him, calming the situation would be impossible. The survivors were on edge. Luckily, despite being nervous, none of them fired a hasty shot at him. It was a good start. Jake remained absolutely motionless, crouching on the car roof with his palms resting on the rusty surface in front of him. He watched them through his large, unblinking eyes. The fear emanating from them was almost tangible. Yet they managed to keep their cool. After surviving in this harsh world for a few days now, they had clearly learned to control their emotions. Nothing happened for a few seconds. The only sound was the whistle of the wind, and the only movement was the swaying of tall grass pushing through the cracks in the road. After the initial surprise faded out, the survivors stirred, whispering among themselves. "What the hell is that thing?" one of them whispered. He slightly turned his head toward the person he spoke to but kept his eyes fixed on Jake. "I've never seen such a mutant before." Even though the group of survivors was some distance away from him and the man was speaking in hushed tones, Jake's heightened sense of hearing let him pick up the words without any trouble, as if the speaker were standing right next to him. "I dunno, man, but that thing looks dangerous," another survivor replied. "It sure is. I'm getting real bad vibes from it." "It's not trying to attack us, though," mentioned the sole female survivor in their group. "Why isn't it attacking us? Mutants usually go after humans on sight." "Somebody scan it," a cold voice cut in. Jake turned his attention to the speaker, a man with a cruel face. He was taller than the others, and his head was smoothly shaved. He was noticeably better equipped than the rest for some reason. There was an aura of authority surrounding him, clearly marking him as the leader of the group. One peculiar detail stood out, a bright red scarf wrapped around his neck. Was it a symbol of something, or merely a practical choice for warmth? Nobody rushed to carry out his command. Each survivor hesitated to release their grip on their weapon and reach for their PDA, almost as if anticipating a sudden attack from Jake. Even though they didn't know what he was capable of yet, primal fear of him had already taken hold. However, the leader wasn't easily scared. And he wasn't having any of their disobedience. It really pissed him off. He turned his bald head to look at the others and bellowed angrily, "Have y'all gone deaf all of a sudden? Fucking scan him already, or I'll bash your stupid skulls in." He was yelling at them without regard for the noise he was creating. He really had a short fuse. Jake was already sick of that guy. He wondered why the others were putting up with his behavior and allowed him to boss them around. It was just one guy, so they could easily gang up on him and beat him up to teach him a lesson on good manners. For some reason, they were truly terrified of him. They flinched at the sound of his harsh voice. While the survivors were scared of Jake, their fear of him was nothing compared to the dread they felt toward their leader. The man standing beside the bald leader was the first to react, reaching into his pocket and extracting his PDA. He slung his automatic weapon over his shoulder and aimed the camera at Jake, gripping the device with both hands. Jake remained still, allowing the guy to scan him. He was curious to know what information would pop up on the screen of the PDA. "Are you done yet?" the leader barked, craning his neck to peer at the PDA held in the man's hands. "What does it say?" "Not much, Frank," the guy replied. "It's called a Morphus, and its level is 11. That's all." "Is it elite?" "No, just a regular mutant." The leader of the group let out a mocking chuckle. "Y'all nearly wet yourselves over a low-level common mutant." "We didn't realize it was so weak, boss," another guy interjected meekly. "Shut your trap, Archie. Nobody asked for your opinion." "It does look scary, Frank," the woman remarked, not letting her gaze off Jake even for a second. "And it managed to sneak up on us without a sound. I think we better not mess with it." "It did make a sound when it leaped onto the car," Archie pointed out. "Yeah," the woman said. "It must have been chasing us silently. It could have attacked us before we even had a chance to notice it, but it jumped onto the car instead, making it creak. It's almost as if it wanted us to be aware of its presence." "Isra, you're giving this mindless freak too much credit," the leader said. "It's just a dumb mutant." "I don't know, Frank. I think we should let it be. And it looks very dangerous." "More dangerous than the other mutants we've killed?" "Yes. Without a doubt." "Geez, Isra, listen to yourself. It's just a regular level 11 mutant, damn it," he said with annoyance in his tone. "What makes you think it's any more dangerous than any other critters we have killed? Let's just say it's a female gut instinct." The leader, Frank, made a scornful noise, but chose not to respond this time. Isra stood her ground, pointing out the mutant's fearful appearance. "Just look at it, Frank," she said. "You can't deny it looks really scary." "All right, everyone," Frank cut her off. "Scary or not, I'm gonna kill that freak." "You're making a mistake, Frank," Isra persisted. It seemed like she was the only one among them who had the courage to oppose their leader. "Your opinion has been noted. You can quiet down now too," Frank dismissed Isra. Glancing at the group, he instructed, "Don't shoot at it. I want to deal with the bastard myself." "Why?" a nervous voice piped up from the group. "Because, Rick, I've never encountered such a thing before," Frank replied slowly, as if explaining to a naive child. "I want to see how much XP I can gain from it. I don't want the XP divided among us if we kill it together and then waste time adding our shares to calculate the total." As Frank took a step forward, pointing his weapon at him, Jake carefully lifted his hands off the rusty car roof and held them up, making sure not to make any sudden moves. "What is it doing?" somebody exclaimed. "It looks like it's trying to surrender or something." "Frank, are you seeing this?" "Do you think I'm blind?" the leader growled, staring at Jake in confusion. "I think it might be intelligent," Isra said. Frank chuckled derisively. "And I think you've gone crazy, woman." "I'm serious. I think it wants something from us. Maybe it wants to communicate with us." "We can't just kill it, Frank," Isra insisted. She shouldn't have said that. Frank wasn't one to be told what he could or couldn't do. Jake began to shake his head, but the leader of the survivors ignored the gesture. "I'm gonna kill the freak." Just before he opened fire, Jake sprang into action, leaping down from the car roof as rounds whizzed over him. Fortunately, the other survivors obeyed the leader's command and refrained from shooting. With only Frank taking shots, evading one barrage of fire was relatively simple for Jake. Knowing he needed them alive, he swiftly spun around and dashed off, hopeful that the survivors would chase after him. As he moved farther away, the bullets Frank fired missed him by an increasingly wider margin. Eventually, Frank ceased firing, prompting Jake to glance back. He noticed the leader of the group breaking into a sprint toward him, while the other survivors stayed put. After he realized they hadn't followed, Frank yelled at them, "What are you standing there for, you idiots? Go after the freak." Reluctantly, they joined the chase. Jake kept running. The situation was not unfolding exactly as he had planned. Not that he had an actual plan to begin with. His goal was to simply make them follow him and lure them into the building with the tower climb challenge. So ultimately his plan seemed to be working. Frank's volatile temperament inadvertently made his task much easier. Jake maintained a steady pace, ensuring that the group could keep up with him. They were so slow compared to him, he could easily give them the slip if he chose to. However, that was not his objective. Upon reaching the building, Jake halted at the entrance, waiting for the group to catch up with him.